Hey everybody, welcome to another Wednesday night. It's The Hang Up. I'm Matt Dillahunty. This is my show. It's called The Hang Up because I hang up on people, but not always here. For those of you who are new here, welcome. I normally, in addition to the Sunday shows that we do that focus on religion, and we will be happy to talk about religion here. If you are someone who believes something supernatural or religious and you want to call in and defend those beliefs, that is exactly what we're for, and we are happy to have you here to do that. Holy moly, you'll have to bear with me for just a second because something weird just happened and I lost my entire notes for the opening. So hopefully you all are well. And let me get this note up because this is, there we go. This is part of what got me here today. This is a tweet from Dawkins. And this is so wild. My entire caller notes just vanished. This is going to be the worst opening in the history of this. Wow. I literally just posted an entire opening. Here we go. Boom. Throw it away. Hi. Welcome to the show. Ignore everything that happened for the last couple seconds. This is a recent tweet from Richard Dawkins. And here's part of what's wrong with it. We'll kind of look at it a little bit. And then there's some more that we're going to get to as well. And we've talked about this before with Dawkins. He has increasingly been wrong about the science, the sociology, the psychology, and just opposed to trans issues and supporting TERFs and gender critical people. So let's take a look at this. Presidential ignorance of and contempt for science. Now that's a good thing to object to. And the second half of his tweet is a legitimate objection because RFK Jr. is a loony that's going to be put in charge of the Department of Health. RFK Jr. is he's already said that he's going after the polio vaccine. He's going after the semaglutide stuff, the Mounjaro, et cetera. That may not be the right name of it. And countless other things, fluoride in the water. Basically, he's a big pile of anti-science brain rot. But in order to do this, Richard decides to mirror the current president. So it's like one president, hot on the heels of an outgoing president who thinks a man can turn into a woman. We now have an incoming president who thinks it's a great idea to put anti-vax loonies in charge of the Department of Health. Now, I can't speak for President Biden. It's entirely possible that Biden may think that a man can become a woman, but I don't, and that's not what trans ideology is. And so while Dawkins has repeatedly been wrong about the science, along with Jerry Coyne and others, he's also wrong about what trans ideology is in general. In no way is this about men turning into women, but it's important to note that not only is that fallacious and a lie on their part, but all or almost all they ever talk about is trans women. Trans women are the focus. They're so butthurt and irritated that the world has changed, that it's trans women that are the problem, not trans people, not trans identity, not trans ideology. It's trans women that are the problem, according to them. And that's why they're the only ones that ever get mentioned. So this is something you'll also see from Sam Harris shortly when we start talking about his recent podcasts. The entire or nearly entire focus is on trans women. The important thing to remember is that nearly every single objection that Dawkins or Harris or anybody else launches with regard to trans ideology is an equivocation fallacy. They're using woman just on its own in the way that I would use cis woman. They're using biological woman in the way that I would use cis woman. And so they contrast trans women with women, trans women with biological women. They don't contrast trans women with cis women, which is the correct position. That is the correct contrast, because trans women aren't claiming to be women in the cis women sense. They're claiming to be women in addition to cis women, and they're not deceiving anybody. They're not claiming to be cis women. They're claiming to be women. So Biden may think that a man can turn a woman, but that's not trans ideology. And if he does, he's almost as confused as his fellow octogenarian Dawkins. Richard, finish your last hurrah and take a nap, because you managed to get the biology wrong, the sociology wrong, the psychology wrong, and you are going after a marginalized tiny portion of the population in order to score points with bigots. And now you're projecting your own biases and confusion onto others. You're anti-science when it comes to the best information about transgender studies, healthcare, and rights. You want to accuse the president of being anti-science, and the current one may or may not be anti-science. The current one may just be oblivious and putting anti-science people in charge of stuff. But neither of them are as anti-science as the should know better prominent scientist who is ignoring both the biology that counters what he said and the psychology and the sociology that counters what his position is. You see, trans folks aren't cis, and they're not claiming to be. It's right there in the trans part, that little adjective. Yeah. When someone says that trans women are women, they aren't calling them cis women. But it definitely sounds like that to the people who fallaciously poison the well by denying any distinction between trans and cis. They deny the categories so that they can recategorize. You're gay, you're a fag, you're an autogynecophile, you're just a man, you're this, you're that. It is, I already have a preconceived notion of who you are, and I'm not going to let you change my preconceived notion at all, no matter how much science you get behind you. Trans folks generally aren't claiming that they become another gender or sex, but that they are a gender which doesn't match the one they were assigned and doesn't match the normative presumptions people are likely to make based on outdated notions of primary and secondary sex characteristics. They're saying it's more complicated than that. And in the same way that a child might know that he's gay, we did this with gay rights. Oh, you just made a choice to be gay. Okay, then we finally get around to, okay, when I was a little kid and I was attracted to both genders or one gender, it's no different. Like, so it's like, when did you decide to be straight? When did you decide to be cis? Oh, well, they can't handle that response, so they have to deny any sort of trans-cis distinction at all. Trans folks are claiming that they are a gender that doesn't match the normative presumptions that people are likely to make on secondary and primary sex characteristics. I decided to bring Arden in as my guest, and she'll be in a couple minutes, as we're going to talk a little bit about trans issues. We're going to talk a little bit about wokeness. We're going to talk a little bit about the political landscape. And as always, we'll still prioritize theistic callers. But she mentioned a podcast that Sam Harris did last month addressing why he thinks the Democrats lost. Now, I haven't worked with Sam or Richard in years. And when he moved his podcast to paid, I haven't even kept up with it after that. So it may be freely available now, but I haven't been paying attention and listening to him. But she played the podcast for me. We listened to a good chunk of it. She listened to more and took more notes. When he was addressing why the Democrats lost, not surprisingly, Sam put the blame squarely on the Democrats' support for trans rights and their inability to message or move to the center. He's convinced that there needs to be a shift to the center, and others think there needs to be a shift to the left. Whether you're someone who thinks there needed to be a shift to the center or to the left, try to set that aside a little bit for right now. Because the reality is that there wasn't a shift to the left by the Dems. They were closer to the center than to the left on a number of things. Sam manages to agree with my view that social media and podcasts like Joe Rogan are poisonous, and they have increased our access to information, which means also they've increased our access to misinformation and bad information and disinformation, and they have actually made us dumber. On that, Sam and I agree. But it seems that even Sam isn't immune while spotting this issue, because while he argues for the center, he makes a number of critical mistakes, not the least of which is that those of us on the left have any interest in moving toward the center. Another error he makes is that he talks about strategy and what is potentially effective, while ignoring what is scientifically accurate and morally preferable. He's willing to sacrifice ideals and justice for a firm status quo defense of the center. But where trans ideology is concerned, he places the most blame. And ironically, despite his avoidance of Twitter, he uses the same outliers and outright lies that the right uses to spread misinformation and propaganda. He talks about 4-year-olds who think they're in the wrong body and males punching women in the Olympics, neither of which are true in any meaningful way. And while he acknowledges that Kamala didn't even talk about trans people or trans issues, he still needs to blame her on the basis of that. And so he thinks that she's still saddled with these issues because one of Biden's first acts was to fulfill a campaign promise with an executive order protecting trans women. And even though they didn't campaign on it, they did that first, and that's going to hang around their neck. And Kamala didn't adequately reply to the lies from the right, although he doesn't call them lies. Sam uses the same language and talking points. It's all about trans women and trans women in sports. It's a social contagion in his mind. It's a loony and bizarre idea. And he might as well be another 4chan bro who wants to watch trans hotties doing porn, but then uses other trans women as a prop to mock and denigrate. The blue-haired, pierced, weird-looking, blah, blah, blah. These are the trans women. And though Sam pays lip service to making trans folks feel welcome and have rights, he dismisses their transness out of hand in every bit of language that he uses in his attempt to discuss it, and by drawing the line on their rights at the imaginary boundary where cis women, who he, like his right-leaning bigot friends, refer to as biological women, where cis women feel uncomfortable. But it's not the left that makes cis women feel uncomfortable, and it's not trans women who make cis women feel uncomfortable. It's the right and the lies and fear-mongering of the right that make cis women feel uncomfortable. The left didn't make trans rights an issue in this election. The right did. And the outrage against it by activists and content creators like myself and others is a response to a direct threat from the right. If someone is threatening a minority group, you don't get to blame the minority group or the people defending them for this being an issue. They didn't make this the issue. The right made this an issue. The right was running ads, which Sam references, about Kamala saying, she's for they, them, he's for you. Remember that. She's for they, them, he's for you. That's not the left causing a problem. But Kamala didn't adequately respond to that accusation. And so the Dems are really bad at messaging and marketing. So it's their fault. Sam's strategy advice was to merely not defend issues at all that can be so easily attacked. Don't have ideals and values, don't have goals of protecting marginalized people, don't have robust policies to protect people in different categories if they can easily be attacked by the opposition. Yet the right's positions, by the way, were also easy to attack the Democrats just suck at messaging. The right's positions were racist, but if you call it racist, why, how dare you, sir? How dare you suggest that I'm a racist? Why, just for that, I'm no longer going to vote for Kamala Harris. I'm going to vote for Donald J. Trump. I will not stand here and have you call me racist. I will retaliate by sacrificing my true position to support the fascists. What a lie. The right's positions were racist in some cases. They were hateful in some cases. They were fear-mongering lies and stupid. They're very easy to attack. Here you go. Tariffs are paid by us, not them. Trump wants to financially punish you, not them. That's how you take the they, them versus the for and against and respin it into an ad that exposes the lie on the right using the very language they used to lie about the left. Democrats are terrible at messaging, in part because some of them, not all of them, are less willing, for pretty good reasons, to lie, to knowingly spread misinformation, to knowingly spread and foment hate, to spread fear and concern over things that shouldn't be issues. If nothing else, if you tune out and you don't engage on this, if you get nothing else out of today, remember, Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins may be champions of atheism, but they are not champions of the left. They are the center. And they are subject and propaganda and prone to the same mistakes of propaganda and disinformation as anybody. And so the language that they're both using represents their confusion about the actual issue, the confusion about the position, their refusal to engage with the people who are the actual knowledgeable experts on this, and instead going straight up for a straw man characterization of trans folks as the blue-haired person that screams, I'm a woman. You're going to treat me as a woman. I'm a real woman. I'm a biological woman. I'm a cis woman, even though I'm a trans woman. This fictional character, because it's much easier to blame that than it is to recognize, or in addition to recognizing, that we're all dumber, that the algorithms have been created and manipulated to feed us misinformation and disinformation, Russian propaganda, propaganda from elsewhere. It is terrifying. Please welcome Arden Hart, who has notes from Sam's podcast for us to review.
Hello.
Hey. You're really cute. Thank you for for doing the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk about this because I already see a bunch of people in the chat who are like, oh, this is like the cult meeting. Egghead USA, call in, defend your position if that's what you really think. Fun guy fun, call in, defend your position. I would love to talk to you guys genuinely. Because I think there's a lot of interesting conversation to have here. So like when it comes to Sam Harris and his podcast, part of the reason that I want to talk about Sam Harris is because he seems to think, as you pointed out earlier in this opening, that like the primary reason that the Democrat Party lost could be put almost entirely. He does say like, no issue is exclusive, but I think this is the main issue, is their acceptance of trans people. And I think that's just patently absurd because one thing a lot of these people will point to, Sam didn't in this podcast, but a lot of people will point to the one exit poll that said, the majority of swing voters who chose Trump said that the reason they did so is because Kamala Harris is focused more on cultural issues like transgender issues rather than helping the middle class. And the problem with that is twofold. One, it's a perception issue, right? They perceive that Kamala Harris cares too much of these things. It has nothing to do with what her actual stated positions on it are. She didn't say the word transgender a single time in her entire campaign. Not once did that sound come out of her mouth. The second part of the issue is that Sam seems to think that the reason people cared about that is for the same reasons he does, which is this notion of biological men punching women in the face and this fear of prescriptive definitions, these things that aren't real, but that are very common in the like gender critical, intellectual, centrist kind of view. But the real reason that mattered to voters is because they want to know when they're going to be able to afford groceries again. They want to know when they're going to be able to buy a house. They want to know when they're going to be able to afford healthcare without going into medical bankruptcy, right? These are the things that matter to the American people. And Trump did a very good job convincing them against the facts of reality that Kamala Harris cared more about trans people than those issues. So it's like this twofold issue. And I think that's what's so frustrating is like the American people don't care about the Olympics, right? Where there wasn't a trans person, as Sam suggested in his podcast. They don't care about those sorts of things. They care about the issues that are affecting them, and they want people to be more invested in those issues. But yeah, I mean, it was just shocking because from the jump, Sam was just spouting so many common lies that you hear straight out of Twitter about trans people, which is ironic for somebody who claims to have left Twitter and to disavow Twitter and accuses Elon of having a Twitter addiction, that sounds like he's never spoken to an actual trans activist in his entire life. So I mentioned, like, he talked about the Olympics, and some of these are direct quotes. Some of them are paraphrasing. I was listening to it on 1.5 times speed, so I didn't get everything word for word. But he said, the American people are not into seeing biological men punch women in the face in the Olympics. If that sounds like transphobia to you, you're the problem. So it's so frustrating. It's so hard to unpack so many of these things because there were no biological men punching women in the face at the Olympics. Those claims have been largely refuted. The only evidence that would suggest that one of them, Iman Khalif, was AMAB, comes out of a Russian federation that had a vested interest in preserving the record of their fighter. So not exactly reliable. Iman claims to be AFAB, assigned female at birth. She was a girl since her whole life. And the fighter who actually gave up in that fight claims to have been training against her for much of their life in Italy and to have known her. So it's like there were no men punching women in the Olympics. That's not a thing that actually happened. And yet that's one of the first things that he mentions when he talks about the culture war and why Democrats lost the election. That's concerning to me as a skeptic and as an atheist. He further goes on to say that to make any distinction between them, being trans women, and biological women for any reason is a thought crime and an act of bigotry. Now, this is incoherent to me because, as we talked about before the show, the phrase trans women in and of itself makes a distinction between trans women and cis women, or what he would say biological women. You're about to jump in?
No, I was saying exactly. I was just agreeing.
Yeah. So it's
just agreeing, not disagreeing.
It's so strange to me. Like we've been doing TACIS for almost 4 years, right? Next March will be 4 years of TACIS happening. And I have never once said myself or heard any trans activist of any merit or any reputation suggest that there are no differences between biological women, cis women, and trans women. That is absurd. Trans women are trans women because we were assigned male at birth, and we were not assigned female at birth. We know that. We're very aware of our biology. That's kind of like a feature of being trans, is the discordance that you feel, at least in most of us, between the awareness of our biology and our experience of gender internally. So the notion that there is some thought crime is absurd. Now, being
as if there's any actual thought crime police or any way to do this. Sam's like, oh, I know, a professor at Harvard who got kicked out or something, or somebody did this. Sam has bought in the notion of cancel culture when really we're talking about accountability. And if your university has policies where you need to respect people's names and pronouns and things like that, and you are obstinately opposed to that, or if you are making life more difficult for students, something that Sam and his friend at Harvard need to remember, students are the fucking customer. They're the ones paying to be at the university, or they earned a scholarship for it, but they are the customer. This is supposed to be an environment where they should be able to learn without harassment, without worrying about being misgendered, without being told, no, you can't use this bathroom. It's ridiculous to pretend, which is what's happening, that there's some actual thought police, that this tiny little minority of less than 1% and the people who agree with them somehow have control over the entirety of the world to punish the bigots, and yet we aren't popular enough to win an election. Or
yeah, it's also like, if you show me a single professor who was fired only for believing in biological essentialism, like that there's only male and female and that's all that matters, then I would condemn that. You're allowed to think whatever you want, but I have a feeling that the story goes a little bit deeper, Sam, than your friend simply espousing a belief like that. I suspect that there was probably an incident with a student or something, and I don't know the situation. I'm saying I'm not going to take Sam's word that that is the only thing, because he's been so detached from reality on this entire topic that I have a hard time believing that is the entirety of the circumstance. But if it were, I would condemn it. You're allowed to believe whatever you want. You're just not allowed to harass people and make our lives difficult. You can believe I'm a man. You can believe trans people aren't real. I don't care what you personally believe. I just want to have the freedom to access society unencumbered by your bigotry.
Yeah, by the way, for those of you, I highly recommend, even though I'm not keen on actually giving Sam the views, this podcast that he posted from a month ago where he goes through this. If you go through and listen to it, get a pencil and a piece of paper and note down every time Sam refers to trans women and every time Sam refers to trans men. Then also make note of the fallacies when he says things like, all of the people I know who voted for Trump did so for this reason. That is a sample size and it's non-representative sample. And yet Sam is reaching conclusions and advocating for conclusions based on all of the people he knows, who, by the way, he makes the point of saying they're significant people. So he's already bought into the notion that some people are more significant than you and that this is relevant as to whether or not they're more likely to be right or whether they should be listened to.
Right.
This is the elitist, I'm going to ride the centrist status quo bullshit that is embarrassing. Sam's on his way to becoming a billionaire, especially as long as he stays friends with Elon.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. He's a wealthy, famous individual, and to think that his friends and his sample size is representative of the American public at large is laughable. But I only have three more things that I wrote down, but there were like a million claims that he made in this that are just the epitome of transgender brain rot. Like you saw one person on Twitter and you assume that this is somehow representative of the activist community at large. The next thing that I wanted to talk about was he talked about how he thinks that trans people are prescribing definitions about women. We're rewriting words and we're prescribing definitions, which I think is not the case at all. Some of my fellow trans activists here might even be bothered that I'm pushing people's attention in this direction, but Stephen Woodford, Rationality Rules, did a debate a few months ago with Thomas Bogardus or something, who I disagree with Thomas on probably most of the things that he says, but Stephen made a really good case for the socially constructed view of gender actually being a better sort of explanation of the data, like a better definition that actually describes how people use the word. And I think it's really worth looking into. It is like a 3-hour-long video, so be warned if you're going to see that. But he also talks about us forcing terms like birthing person on women. Again, Twitter brain rot, right? Birthing person, these sorts of terms came out because like OBGYNs, doctors who prescribe like birthing care for people, decided to make their language inclusive, so non-binary people and trans men who want to get pregnant don't feel outed by that sort of language, or don't feel like unincluded, don't feel unwelcome in those spaces. but nobody is advocating for calling individual patients a birthing person. Nobody is advocating for ceasing the use of the word mother for cis women who access this care. Nobody, not a single person. Okay. You can find any individual person who espouses some crazy view. There is no meaningful portion of the population who is advocating for replacing the word women with birthing person. That is just a fiction. These are just terms that are useful in like medical settings and academic settings for distinguishing the difference between solely talking about cis women and talking about the population of all people who can get pregnant. That includes more than just cis women. He also talks about how teenage girls, due to a social contagion, are getting irreversible procedures. I think this is hilarious because, again, we've talked about this on TACIS so many times, but your natal puberty is an irreversible procedure, or not a procedure, but an irreversible process that you go through, right? This is the main reason that trans people end up getting surgery down the road, because we go through puberty that causes, notwithstanding surgery, surgical intervention, irreversible changes to our body. The entire reason that we deliver care to trans minors is to give them the best evidence-based path to having a successful, comfortable transition in their body. There are, of course, risks with any medical intervention. That includes gender-affirming care, but that applies to everything. Taking an acetaminophen when you have a headache comes with risks. And all of medicine is a risk-benefit analysis. The fact that procedures are irreversible is not exclusive to gender-affirming care. And if we are actually going to hold that through to its logical conclusion, we wouldn't be able to give like chemotherapy to young cancer patients. That's going to cause irreversible changes to their body. What about minors who get pregnant? Those are irreversible changes to your body. So many things cause irreversible changes to your body. The complaint about this is absurd. Growth, aging is an irreversible change to your body. Like, it's absurd that this is a complaint.
Yeah, and that's worth noting. That's the thing that we're trying to deal with, is that we're in this position where biologically puberty makes irreversible changes in many respects to someone's body. And some people are in a position where they may not want those changes because those changes don't align with their identity. And then the question becomes, hey, if we were to use something like puberty blockers, that could do, that could do irreversible permanent change. Yeah, it's also preventing some of that. There is a difficult line to walk here, especially because when we're talking about minors, you're talking about people who have adults who are their stewards, who are the guardians that are going to have to make decisions for them. And there's a concern that if they're too young, they can't make this decision. And so what you end up doing is you take these people, including children, and you go through a rigorous process, which begins with counseling, which begins with therapy, which begins with discussions with experts so they can begin to recognize, am I talking to somebody who's confused? Am I talking to somebody who's seen a TikTok thing and is going for a fad? And then you begin to implement some changes. Try on a different name, start wearing different clothes, present yourself a little differently, live life a little differently, and see if that feels more accurate to you. All of those things happen long before we get to drugs or surgery or anything like that. But there is a clock there that is ticking. And how many, and I'm sure there's some in chat, how many older trans folks knew they were trans when they were kids, and now they're in their 60s, their 70s, their 80s, and they didn't have any options. So the very nature of their transition is fundamentally different from what we're seeing. And what we're trying to do is make sure that these kids don't end up being 65 and regretting that they wasted 45 years of their life.
Yeah.
And in doing so, it wasn't them wasting that 45 years. It was other people.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. You know, people talk a lot about regret with transition. And while it's worth noting that empirically, the data we have shows that regret for trans people getting medical intervention is extraordinarily low, much lower than the vast majority of medical interventions. The regret is bidirectional, right? The people who, like you're saying, are kids who aren't allowed access to transition, they have a regret that they weren't allowed to access that care earlier, and that matters too. I also wanted to point out there was a chatter. I missed their name. I think they've already gone by, but they mentioned that kids can't consent. This is a very common reply when we're talking about minors accessing trans care. It's worth noting that kids don't consent to any medical interventions. A combination of their parents and their medical professionals consent to all medical procedures on behalf of minors, with the exception of kids who are like orphans. They don't have parents. In some cases, they can get special treatment from doctors, or in some states, like when you're like 16, you can access certain kinds of treatment. But with minors, generally speaking, your parents are consenting on your behalf. And this is an evaluation of all the evidence, right, that's going in, like you were talking about. You're talking to experts, therapists. You used to have to talk to endocrinologists, but we eventually discovered that that was actually unnecessary and kind of just being cumbersome on the medical system to force them to talk to endocrinologists. And it's easier to just have them talk to their GP. These are things that can be managed by your general care doctor. So I have one more thing to talk about with regard to Sam Harris, and then I kind of have a departing thought that I want to give to the audience before we get into calls. He also mentioned the policy in Europe changing radically in recent years. This is a thing that transphobes love to say. And there definitely have been changes, particularly in the UK. But in Europe broadly, several countries have moved gender affirming care for minors over to a model where you are only accessing that care when you are a part of a academic study or like a medical study. So the care is not denied completely, but it is much harder to access. And I would say unfairly harder. But it's not like they have shown that transition care for minors hurts them, is worse for them in the long term, or causes a lower quality of life. In fact, we have lots of evidence to suggest quite the contrary, that it improves their quality of life, reduces suicidality. Also, that the majority of kids who access this care go on to do a full transition later. But again, that's why things like puberty blockers exist, because we're trying to give kids this buffer window to figure out what's happening. And this is care, by the way, that is given to cis kids of the same age for similar problems. A cisgender girl who is going through puberty at 12 and feeling like she's developing, this is not your body is going to get hurt if you grow boobs at 12. No. This is this girl or their parents saying, I feel like I'm developing faster than my peers, and the doctor saying, we can intervene with this kind of medicine. For the same exact reason that trans kids are getting it, these social reasons. So this is discrimination, patently, that like definitionally discrimination against trans people. But yeah, I've been seeing chats going crazy. There's a lot of people who disagree with what we're saying, and I would love for you guys to call in. I think we could have some really good discussions, and I see that there's quite a few people on the line. But before we do that, there's one thing I just want to leave people with, and that is my frustrating thing with all of this, with Sam talking about, how the Democrats won't let go of this issue or whatever, is I would love to stop talking about this issue. I would love for TACIS to cease to exist. Our trans call-in show that we do on Thursdays, I would love for that to never happen again, and for me to not have to do this ever. There are so many things I'd rather be doing with my time. We have a reptile business. I have my little tree skinks in the background there. I love them. They're my favorite lizards of all time. I would love to spend all my time with like a huge collection of a bunch of them, to be watching shitty reality TV shows and doing my graphic design stuff for the line and doing editing for the line. Those are things I love doing. They're fun to me. They feel meaningful and fulfilling. Those are the things I want to be doing with my life. The reason I do TACIS, the reason I'm here tonight talking about Sam Harris, is not because this is fun for me. It's not because this is something I like. This is because, one, I'm educated on how to read research papers. And so I think I am, in some sense, uniquely qualified to talk about these kinds of issues. And I am a trans person myself. So I am uniquely qualified to talk about the experience of trans people.
What?
And it drives me crazy that the right wing will spread so many lies about us and that we play on their turf. Sam Harris plays on their turf about the things that they say about us, rather than just advocating for trans people on our own terms. We want individual liberty. Even if we throw everything else out about trans people deserve the right to express themselves and be who, use the name, wear the clothes they want to, just as a matter of bodily autonomy. I'm not hurting anyone by having a fucking boob job and by having long hair and wearing a pinkish red shirt. These things might not be things that men normatively do. I don't give a fuck because I don't consider myself a man, and I'm not asking anyone else to buy into me. I am just trying to live the life that I want to live. Leave me alone. Leave trans people the fuck alone. And this will all get so much better. If you all stop buying into this bullshit and playing on their terms, we could all move on. We could all have a much better life and talk about issues that actually affect all Americans, like healthcare, like our wages, like your minimum wage, like the cost of housing. We could talk about things that actually matter and progress society in a way and stop having this left-right dichotomy and acknowledge the top and bottom dichotomy that is actually crushing American people, right? That's what I want for us. I'm so fucking sick of talking about this issue and having to respond to people like Sam Harris making all these bullshit claims about trans people with absolutely no fucking evidence. It's appalling for an alleged, self-proclaimed skeptic to have made this his pioneering issue. I think it's disgusting. And quite frankly, if he actually published an apology, I would make my own personal video apologizing back to him for, going so hard on him. I wouldn't apologize for calling him out because he deserves to be called out for the misinformation. But I just want people to leave trans people the fuck alone. I'm so sick of this. I have better things to do with my time. And I just want to do what all Americans are supposed to have access to, which is, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I'm tired of playing this game, and I really wish we could move on. So, yeah.
I think one of the things that was so disappointing for me is, I've done multiple events with Sam, and unlike other people, I've actually been able to, sit down with Sam at the bar after the event or behind the scenes and have conversations. And I want, people have attacked him repeatedly, unjustly, based on what he said. And they've done the same to me and Richard and everybody else. But what I found, it's not so, everything about it's disappointing. But one of the things that really struck me as incredibly disappointing, no surprise that he's trying to hold the center and is not left, because I know he's not that far left. But he tries to sound like he's looking out for trans people. In the podcast, he's like, let's give them their rights and make sure that they can, live their life and be respected and do stuff. He is an advocate of what, or he plays as if he's an advocate for what Arden said, which was leave them the fuck alone. But then he wants to put a limit on that, which is let's give them their rights until cis women are uncomfortable, and then they don't get those rights anymore. Let's give them their rights until, but we don't need to talk about it because the American public doesn't want to hear about it. Well, tough shit. Who cares that 99% of the people who aren't affected by it don't want to hear about it?
Shocker.
Keep putting your head in the sand. You know what else we don't want to hear about? We don't want to hear about Ukraine. We don't want to hear about Gaza. We don't want to hear about genocide. We don't want to hear about, anything else that's going on in the world because that's not us. We don't want to hear the truth about the economy. We don't want to hear about climate change. We want to keep our head firmly buried in the sand. We don't want to offend the people on the right who are advocating for bigoted, hateful policies that harm people. We just want to get them to, quiet down over there and just leave us alone. Hey, it's like Wall said, mind your own damn business. That'd be awesome. except that Sam decided not to mind his own business, but to make a podcast where instead of merely pointing out that messaging was bad, that there was confusion, that the rights lives weren't challenged, he decided to take a marginalized 1% of the population and shit all over them while pretending like he wasn't. And for that, fuck you, Sam. I hope you think about this because I like you. But that was fucked up as all get out. You should be ashamed and embarrassed, and you should spend some time thinking about this. Not in the sense of, young man, you need to sit down and think about this, but you should actually spend some time thinking about this because it's very clear that the language you're using is the same language that 4chan uses. It's the same language that Twitter uses, and it's the same language that Dawkins uses. You didn't say men think they can turn into women like Dawkins did. So congratulations on being smart enough to recognize problematic language when Richard isn't. But you said just as bad and worse while trying to pretend like you weren't just as bad or worse. And that's pretty bad. We got a bunch of calls, babe.
Yep, let's get to it.
Let's just start at the top. Jacob's calling from Tennessee. Jacob's in atheist pronouns are he, him, and wants to know about the appropriate way to deal with trans youth. So, Jacob, you're on with Arden Hart.
Hey, Jacob.
Hello, can you hear me?
We gotcha. All right, so I know I talked to you before, Jacob. Yep. Oh, can you hear us?
Okay.
Oh. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, good. Yeah, so we talked
Arden
before, Jacob, so everyone knows we've talked before. So yeah, I think we're kind of picking up midway, maybe in a conversation, but let's clean fresh for the audience since they haven't seen all of that. What are you talking to us about today?
So I have a trans niece, and which led me to reading a lot of science about it and seeing what everyone in the world was doing about it. I didn't want to just have a American perspective. I wanted a world perspective. And so I looked at, some of the most progressive countries in the world and historically for most progressive countries in the world and what a lot of Europe was doing. And there's I found this huge discrepancy between the way trans children are treated in the United States versus how they're treated in Europe. And the studies that the European countries have done that inform their policy decisions, their conclusion, all their conclusions, and I found one today from the European Academy of Pediatrics, almost all their conclusions is we don't have enough evidence to recommend this treatment for minors because it hasn't proved, we don't believe that it's proved to be beneficial. It's basically still up in the air.
Sure.
So I'm left kind of in limbo here.
Yeah. So I think it's worth noting that a lot of this kind of has started in the UK, probably with like the CAS report as a good example. And we could get into some of the problems with the CAS report. It's also worth noting that what these countries are doing is what we talked about earlier in the opener. They are changing their policy for how they administer this care. Most of them aren't banning it altogether, although the UK did just ban puberty blockers, at least, for minors. What a lot of them are doing is moving this to a research basis. So kids are getting access to this care, but only under the supervision of a research study. It's also worth noting that, granted, I haven't seen as much research since coming out of school, because you don't get to have access to actual full text papers without paying an absurd amount of money. What I've seen has been not new studies, but literature reviews of the existing studies. If you don't know what a literature review is basically where they look at all the existing studies and kind of try to summarize them and come to some sort of conclusion about them. In the example of, yeah, right, exactly, or a meta-analysis. In the case of the CAS review, part of the problem that I have with the CAS review is, one, Hillary Cass was framed as this sort of neutral person, and I don't think that's completely accurate. But secondly, they discredited a large number of studies because they weren't double-blind or they didn't have a sufficiently long follow-up period. And the reasoning they gave, I have some problems with. Firstly, it's almost completely impossible to conduct a double-blind study on gender-affirming care, as it is almost impossible to conduct a double-blind study on a number of different medical interventions like radiology, because you have to not give the care to an individual, which would be considered unethical in most modern frameworks. So it's just impossible to collect that level of data. Although it would be really nice, and maybe we would find that, you know, there's some other problem that we aren't seeing with this gender affirming care. But secondly, the problem I have is they make this claim that there isn't sufficient follow-up, which is I find interesting because they note that there are several times where the follow-up period is as long as 8 years. However, they say that this isn't long enough because all of the regret, all of the harm that comes could start after 8 years, which is purely speculative. They don't actually present evidence to back up this point. They just say, we don't know, therefore we're throwing it out. But to me, this disregards the entire premise of what medicine is. Medicine is a risk-benefit analysis. We're saying, yes, we know there are some risks. Yes, we know there are probably some unforeseen outcomes that are going to happen. But the benefit that this child could get, those are things that we do have evidence for. That suicidality does go down when these populations are accessing this medicine, that their quality of life, their self-reported quality of life goes up, and that the majority of these people go on to access full transition care down the road. So I understand the concern, and it may be the case that puberty blockers are more complex than we realize right now. However, it's worth noting that puberty blockers have been given to cisgender kids for decades. And we know the guidelines. We know that if you cease your endogenous puberty for longer than 2 years, that's when you start having issues like bone density issues, brain development issues. But the medical guidelines for trans kids accessing this care is the same as cis kids accessing this care, which is to not give it for a period of longer than 2 years. At that point, you would then either return to your endogenous puberty, your natural puberty, or you would get the exogenous puberty, that those hormone replacement therapies, or some combination thereof. So I think a lot of what you're talking about, these European studies, they're casting doubt on the efficacy of trans care because they don't think we have sufficient good evidence. I think we do. Most US medical organizations think we do, but they don't actually show that it's bad, that it's harmful, that there's some reason we should be stopping it. And contrarily to what you're saying, France actually just conducted a review of the care and found the exact opposite of all that it was actually beneficial for them, and that we can safely diagnose kids who are trans, and that we can give them care safely that improves their quality of life. And that also was just released like a month ago. So I think it's fair to say that we need more information on that. I'm always down with getting more information, but the degree of skepticism that we have coming out of Europe, and particularly spawned by the UK on this issue, I don't think it's fair to say is a purely scientific one. I think it is very ideologically motivated. That was a lot.
What about like Sweden, France, Germany? You feel like it's the same for those countries as well?
Well, like I just said, France actually just released the exact opposite of all that. They found that it was beneficial, positive, we can safely diagnose and all that stuff. But sure, but again, these other countries never found that it was harmful or that it was bad. They're just saying that they don't think the data is good enough. And part of the reason they think that is for the reason that I told you, that they don't think the follow-ups are long enough, or that they don't have double-blind trials or those sorts of things. But lots of medical interventions that are not controversial, that are not banned, don't meet the standards that they're requesting for gender-affirming care in these cases. Lots of medical interventions that are not controversial don't have a massive body of data behind them. You'd be actually shocked. I forget where it is, but there is a grading system for the quality of evidence of medical care. And you'd be shocked how many commonplace, uncontroversial medical treatments are in the poor quality of evidence category, because it's really difficult to ethically study a lot of medical things. Because when we find that they're improving people's lives, that they're improving symptoms for people, all of a sudden to not give that becomes a massive ethical concern, because you are denying something that we have good reason to think does help people's lives, just because we don't have good reason, just because we don't have what you think is enough information to worry about the harms. I think it's fair to be concerned. We all care about kids. We all want to see the best for children. But to suggest that because a few European countries are saying the evidence isn't good enough to be for it and having nothing against it, and other countries are saying it's great, we have good evidence that it's good for people. To me, it seems like the obvious conclusion is what we do in medicine all the time. We say, if evidence comes out in the future that shows this is bad, we will stop it. But as of right now, all of the evidence is pointing us that this care is probably the best thing for people who, fit some whatever diagnostic criteria, and that we should be administering this care where it's necessary.
Well, hopefully we'll get some good information from the trials that they're conducting in a lot of these European countries, because a lot of the premise rests on the notion that therapy, like mental therapy, good therapy, is sufficient enough. And I also point you to the study that I don't think you were on the show, but there's a study that came out this year, and it's called Gender Non-Contentness in Youth, and it basically they surveyed a lot of children, and they asked them if they felt like they were the wrong sex. And at 11, I'll use the females for example because that's what I'm familiar with. And at 11, I think it's maybe 15 or maybe like 13% of children, females that age, think they're trans. And every year it goes down, down, down until the age of, I believe it was 23, and it's like 2.5% at 23. So, you could have someone who is, let's just say they get into the system at 11 or 13, and they're experiencing I forget what the language was used, but it was like it has to be long term, it has to be sustained, etc.
Persistent and insistent.
Well, yeah. So these kids could fit that definition, but they will ultimately not be trans because, like I said, only 2% of them are trans at the end of by the time they're 23. So it's go ahead.
Sure. And what's wild is trans folks represent about 1% of the population right now. So even after we've gone through the process that you described, if your numbers are accurate, and we get to a point where a bunch of people thought they might be trans, and we ended up with 2% or so trans, that's still what we would expect, 1 to 2% for accurate.
Yeah. I also think it's worth noting that, this is what a lot of the guidelines for youth are, to have them evaluated first by therapy and then to talk to a medical specialist and to evaluate their candidacy for gender affirming care. It is not like they just automatically throw people in. Sure, we do self-report, right? But that's the case for a lot of things like pain and depression and anything that is something you are evaluating about your internal state. But I also think it's important to notice that, let's say it's 10% at 15 and 2% at 21, right? Let's say some small portion of those people get gender affirming care. Maybe they get testosterone, and maybe at 18, they get a double mastectomy. Even in the case of people who end up finding out at 21 that they don't actually consider themselves maybe a man, maybe they consider themselves still a woman or something. Do you think that those people wish that they were, the majority of them who got those, medical interventions, testosterone and the like, do you think that the majority of those people then wish that they were like a gender conforming cis woman with breasts and long hair and femininity? Or do you think that it's more likely that those were women who were probably already, queer, lesbian, however they want to identify themselves, and would present in a gender non-conforming way to begin with? Because I know a lot of people like that, a lot of people who fit the description you just made. And I know several of them who did transition and then found out transness wasn't, they didn't consider themselves men. And every single one of them that I know personally, granted that is a biased sample, but it aligns from my understanding with the data, all of those people don't consider themselves cis. They're not like, yes, I am now a cisgender woman who's going to marry a man and have kids, and I wish I still had breasts. No, they're all like, you know what? I don't know what fucking gender I am. I just want to be me. I don't want to think about gender. I don't want to worry about what other people's concerns about my gender are. I'm happy with the decisions I've made for my body and my health, and I just want to be me regardless of what label you want to put on that. So I don't know. like the concerns that you're bringing up, I think are already things that medical professionals are thinking about when they're evaluating patients. And all of the data that we've seen on, like, there are some pretty massive studies of surveying trans people and like their regret rates and things like that. And they're extraordinarily low with massive sample sizes in those studies. So I think it's to the extent that people aren't ending up, identifying as trans at that age, I still don't think it's fair to consider that they are like, or I think it's a misnomer to think that, oh, those people are going to feel so much regret, all of them, because they're going to wish they were stereotypical cis women. I don't think that's the case. Some of them obviously will be, some portion of them will be, and those people deserve care, deserve access to whatever they need to feel good in their bodies after the fact. But I don't think it's a meaningful enough portion of the population that we should be denying the rest of them access to this care.
No, we need a way to separate the 2% from the 13%. We need to try and find a good method to determine who's going to actually.
This is what I'm saying, though, is that we already kind of do that.
Yeah, I'm like, isn't that what happened? You just described a situation that distilled exactly the thing that you're saying you want to be able to distill.
I'm sorry?
You just described a scenario that actually distilled it down to the 2%, and now you're saying we need a way to distill it down to 2%, which is what just happened.
What Arden was saying?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, the processes we have in place already account for the majority of those people, and the ones that they don't account for are not people who are going to be like, golly, I wish I was a trad wife, right? These are people who identify and often cases as queer and are happy with being whoever they are, regardless of what label you want to put on top of it. Like, I already think the processes we have in place are showing that they're highly effective at filtering out those portions of the people, those percentages of the populations that we're concerned with.
Yeah. I talked to Dr. Ben about this, and that's why I'm saying that there doesn't seem to be a good way, because Dr. Ben didn't give me an answer as to how the methodology, and maybe you don't know the methodology right now, that's why, but that's why I asked Dr. Ben.
I just gave you one, though, right? I mean, and I don't remember
the methodology,
the specific.
Would you mind saying it again? I'm sorry.
We're already evaluating these kids through therapy and talking to a medical professional, and they usually have to get the consent of their parents to access this treatment. And by that time, that number is going to already be lower. And then by the time a smaller portion of those people are going to access hormones, and a smaller portion of those people are going to access surgery, and the ones who still wish they were cisgender trad wives at the end of all of that is going to be a minuscule, tiny percentage of those people. And it doesn't mean they don't deserve care. It doesn't mean they don't deserve empathy. What I'm saying is the system already accounts for this population. And there's not a meaningful, like, statistically significant percentage of the population that you're talking about who is saying, yes, we have meaningful regret. There are individuals for sure, and they are famous. They are flown around by the Heritage Foundation to testify at hearings for bills across the US. But there are not statistically significant populations of these people who are reporting, I was the 15% and they cut off my boobs and now I want to be a trad wife. But we're not seeing a statistically significant portion of the population tell you that.
Sure. I will just point out that the study I'm referring to came out this year. It came out maybe June this year.
And the French one that I told you about that showed it was effective at categorizing who benefits from care came out a month ago.
Yeah. So these are fairly new things. And it just,
So Jacob, can we depart from the research discussion? Because I want to talk about something else with you now after hearing your response to that. Okay. So it's a little bit frustrating because, like I said at the beginning, I think having concerns is valid. We all want the best for kids. We all want to see kids as happy and healthy as they can be. What you're bringing me is not data that shows it's harmful, not data that shows there's a statistically significant rate of regret. You're not bringing me data that shows that there's a problem with what's going on here. You're just saying that there are some countries who think that there's not enough data that shows it's good. And you know what? Fair enough. But there's lots of data that does show it's good. And we're spending a lot of time where, like, I will talk to you about you know, the ways we diagnose people, the ways we work through these populations, the ways, you know, what percentage of people are getting these procedures. And at the end of all of that, rather than contend with what I said, you just go, well, yeah, but what about the stuff that I brought up at the beginning that shows that some people don't know? Like we already addressed it. So I'm not sure if you're not listening or if there's something else going on. Like, help me understand what's the disconnect here.
No, it's just that basically the answer you're giving me isn't the dirty details, right? You're kind of giving me like a bit of a vague
true,
response,
though.
and that's not.
It wasn't vague, though. It wasn't vague, and it was the dirty details. We were talking about the numbers and statistical significance of populations. Go ahead, Matt.
Jacob, what is it that you want? Do you want a foolproof way to read someone's mind and know when they're actually trans or not before making the decision? Because that will never fucking happen.
No, I don't think it's appropriate to treat kids for being trans.
Nobody gives a fuck what you think. Nobody gives a fuck what you think, Jacob. You're not the one making the decision. This is up to medical experts who study this and who understand that you're never going to be able to read minds. So you don't want to treat someone because you're uncomfortable with it when that's none of your fucking business.
It's also my frustration that, like, this is what I said at the beginning, Jacob, that we've had this discussion before, and I didn't want to pick up where we left off. I wanted to start fresh, but it feels like it's hard for me to believe you're intellectually honest, because we've had this exact discussion before, and we've gotten exactly here before, where I respond in depth to the data and like the rates of regret and the way we diagnose people, and you don't acknowledge it at all. You just go back to, well, this one country published this one protocol that shows that we might not be as confident about how good it is. And so it's really hard to feel like it's really hard to feel like it's really hard to feel like you're being intellectually honest when you're here. Like, I'm trying to understand, because, like, again, like Matt was saying, like, we're never going to be able to know for sure. And how you feel about it, like, a lot of people are uncomfortable with abortion, right? But a lot of those people who are uncomfortable with abortion recognize that it's not their call and that it is the call of medical professionals. This should be very similar. You don't have to be comfortable with it. You don't have to understand it. You have to acknowledge that the medical profession understands this issue pretty well, and that your weighing in on this is not helping anyone. So I'm just trying to understand, like, I want to help you feel comfortable, but it doesn't feel like you're showing up honestly in a way that I could do that.
What treatments, Jacob, are you? Jacob,
Sorry?
the dirty details don't exist. You can use that common parlance. Here's the thing. What treatments are you comfortable giving to kids? Name one.
In trans kids?
No, kids.
I'm not a doctor, so I'm not comfortable giving any treatment.
Oh, interesting.
Okay. I'm so done with you, Jacob, after sitting here listening patiently and then pointing out that what you're looking for, shut up, what you're looking for isn't possible, and then giving you the benefit of the doubt and saying, okay, since you're opposed to treating kids for trans stuff, what else are you opposed to treating kids for? And all of a sudden, you're not shut your fucking mouth.
Excuse me?
I said, shut your fucking mouth. Don't interrupt me while I'm talking. Is that too difficult for you to understand? Is that too difficult for you to fucking understand? Here, let me fucking mute your dumb ass.
This is because what I was saying,
all of a sudden, you turned into not a doctor, which is the point that I was making before. Mm-hmm. You're not a doctor. You're not their doctor. So it doesn't matter whether you're comfortable. So after exposing your flawed thinking, all of a sudden, you're not a doctor, but you're really happy to interrupt me while I'm explaining that, after I sat here and patiently waited for you to finish fucking talking. So apologize and we'll move on.
Excuse me for interrupting you, Matt.
Thank you.
I'm not sure that was really an apology, but yeah.
It wasn't an acceptance of apology. It was an acknowledgement of something near adjacent to an apology.
I think we should call it here, Jacob. With all due respect, again, you say you're honest, and look, I appreciate that you probably have a sincere concern for your niece or your nephew, maybe. I don't know how they would consider themselves. And I appreciate that you seem to have a sincere interest in this. But again, this is what I called you out on last time. I think it might have been you. Maybe I'm wrong. And I think you told me that you're absolutely not, you don't have a bias against trans people. But what Matt just pointed out is that you clearly do. Like when it comes to other medical interventions, yes, you do. And I'm going to mute you because, again, you have a problem with interrupting. When it comes to medical interventions that aren't related to trans people, you defer to the doctors, you defer to the medicine, you defer to I'm not a specialist. But when it comes to trans people, you feel that you need to give it your stamp of approval. That is, Jacob, definitionally a bias against trans people. You unfairly apply a standard against trans people that you don't hold for every other kid. And like, I would honestly have more respect for you if you just owned that rather than denying it. That's my personal frustration with this call. So I think we're going to call it here, Jacob.
I have one question.
Say something?
No, I have a question. And after you answer it, I might let you say something. How's that? How many times have you called in to our shows on trans topics? A bunch, right?
Maybe 3.
How many times have you called into any show ever to object to a non-trans 12-year-old girl getting puberty blockers?
I've never objected to it.
Exactly. You've never fucking done it, which demonstrates the bias here. You are a busybody who wants perfection and can't get it. Welcome to reality. What would you like to say?
I'd like to say I don't know what Arden's referring to. That I would. I'm using different standards for trans kids. I don't understand.
Honestly, Jacob,
you would understand if you were smarter. I literally just explained it to you by showing what you do and you don't do.
Honestly, Jacob, for me, it's a concern of you not listening. This has happened several times where you've asked me for something, I've given it to you, and then you've said that you don't feel like you got it. And honestly, that's a you problem because I know this stuff really well, and I'm very confident in the answers that I gave you. So you really should watch it back and maybe take a month off before you call in about this topic again, because I think we're going to pass on the rest of this conversation for tonight. So you have a good night, Jacob. Can I sum up?
No.
Yeah, we're done with you tonight. Bye, Jacob.
I asked you what else you wanted to say, and you didn't take the opportunity to do anything but be awful.
It's frustrating because I do sympathize with like the concern aspect, and that it starts to feel like concern trolling. If y'all know what concern trolling is, it's like feigning concern. I'm not saying Jacob is faking, but I'm saying that's what it feels like, where it's like this feigning concern so that you can sort of belabor the skepticism on an issue like transness. And it really is for me and this is the problem with like people like Sam Harris too, where it feels like I would have more respect if there was a sincere skepticism for puberty blockers writ large. I would have more respect if there was a sincere skepticism for the ability of kids to consent to medicine writ large. But that's not what's happening. Like, it is exclusively about trans kids, and the evidence for trans kids is pretty good. Could it be better? Absolutely. I always welcome better data, more research. But yeah, it's a little frustrating. It's hard to think that he's an intellectually honest person when that's what we're dealing with.
It's hard to do medical research. It's harder to do medical research on kids. It's harder to do medical research on trans kids. You are narrowing down the pool of people and restricting what you can and can't do. It is unethical for us to do medical experiments on people just for the sake of experimenting. Mm-hmm. And so what we have to do is statistical analysis, meta-analysis, psychological analysis, and make the best judgment call we can at any time. And that's why we leave it to the experts and not to Justin. Jacob, sorry, fuck.
Before we do the next call, it'd be a good time to remind people that you should hit like and subscribe. And also, right below the video player, I just added merch to our merch shelf. There's a little thing that pops up that shows you merch. Even if you don't want to buy it, just clicking it helps the algorithm. And we're really close to 150,000 subscribers. I'd really appreciate it if you would engage with the channel and click links or in some way, leave a comment after the video. It helps the video and it's totally free. So yeah, that's all I had to add.
Cool. So we said we put theist callers at the top. So we got a couple of theist callers. One of them not about trans issues. Another one is a theist about trans issues. So Dirk's here from California, prone to him. And Dirk, it says here, let's evolve past material distinction. Plus the medical industry is sad. I don't understand either of those. So tell us what you're talking about.
Okay. So I feel like the whole concept of gender itself is just like a reaffirmation of this distinction between man and woman and male and female. It's like in many ways like an arbitrary distinction, like
it's not arbitrary.
Like defining.
It's not arbitrary.
Well, not like medically, but I mean, like, there are distinctions that I think are more prominent, like behavioral or like what people are interested in. And we could define people by like their interests or their...
That's part of, so gender is at the intersection of biology, sociology, and psychology. So that's the psychology aspect of it.
Yeah.
Both with identity and with preferences and things like that. What is, so you are calling about gender stuff because it wasn't included there. What do you mean, let's evolve past material distinction?
Okay. So I don't think that we should be like a man wears this or behaves like this and a woman wears this and behaves like this. And then because I identify with one or the other or, whatever, that means that I'm leaning...
Do you think that's what I'm advocating for?
Well, I'm not saying what you're advocating for. I'm talking about something I think we should not be doing. So I'm not saying
Dirk, it sounds like you're saying we need to stop thinking about differences between people and just let people be people.
Yeah, that's
cool.
Yeah.
When your fantasy world becomes reality, let me know. But the reality is we do make distinctions, sometimes for good reasons, sometimes for bad reasons. But until your fantasy utopia comes true, we have to deal with the reality we actually live in, which means that there are going to be distinctions between men and women.
Yeah, period. I think, Dirk, it sounds like what you're talking about is gender abolitionism. And I've said before on this channel many times, and it's fair if you haven't seen every video or whatever. But I've said many times, like, I view gender abolitionism much like I view socialism, where it's like this beautiful shining beacon on the hill that is maybe a good compass to inform the direction that we move society. But like, it feels weird to me to maybe be like, let's stop talking about this altogether because we should be a society that's egalitarian and doesn't like have to worry about gender roles. I agree, but that's not the society we're living in. And it feels very similar to like kind of like race blindness talk where it's like, let's stop talking about race because, everyone should be egalitarian. It's like, yeah, I agree. I would love to live in a world where race isn't a problem and where gender isn't a problem, but that's not the world we live in, right? We live in this world right now. So let's maybe work on improving the world we live in and working towards the world you're talking about. But like, I don't know what else to say. Like, I don't disagree that I would rather have a gender abolitionist world, but I don't think it's very realistic in any of our lifetimes. Probably not our grandchildren's lifetimes, in my opinion.
Okay, I agree with what you're saying. I don't think it's like an immediately practical thing. It's like something that, it's like veganism or something. It's like being a vegan oneself or being a gender abolitionist is not itself solving all the problems. It's sort of like embodying like a guidepost or some example of how we think things should be. So what I'm saying is by embodying... Sorry.
Okay. Do you think there aren't differences between men and women?
There are clearly differences, like I know medically and like bone structure and things like this. And I know there are differences. I'm not in any way saying there are not differences. What I'm saying is that people are focusing on these differences, I think, in times when maybe they shouldn't be. Yeah, go ahead.
I agree. Do you think there are differences between races?
Well, my understanding from listening to Forrest Valkai is that there's a 99.9% similarity between all different people. So whatever
that's not an answer. That's not an answer to my question. There's also a 99% similarity between us and chimpanzees. What I was asking is, there are visible and cultural differences between ethnic groups and races. And it doesn't matter that race is a social construct. There are observable differences. And as long as that's the case, there are people who are going to draw distinctions there. Similarly, as long as there's distinctions between men and women or blondes and brunettes, people are going to have their preference. And some, the ones that prefer bald people, they're the ones that are right. But you have perhaps a good goal in let's be a post-gender world. And it might be nice to be a post-racial world. But I have a friend, Anthony Penn, who's a professor at Rice University, and he's Black. And I said, as did other people early on, we bought into this notion of, oh, I don't see race. And Tony said, stop saying that, because it's a lie. Everybody sees race. And when you say, I don't see race, you are diminishing the value of people. You are ignoring the oppression that they experience. You are suggesting that there isn't sufficient difference between a marginalized minority group and the unmarginalized majority group. Similarly, while it might be nice for some people to live in a post-gender world, it's not going to be nice for everybody. Some people genuinely like gender roles and being associated with a gender role. And it's not just, oh, I feel like a woman, like Shania Twain. It is, this is where my actual identity is. I don't think it's a good idea to be so ideologically pristine that we fundamentally deny the real lived experience of people and their identity. Because the only way to get to a post-gender world is to say, no, you're not a man. No, you're not a woman. No, you're not non-binary. You're not this, you're not that. We have to actively deny what goes on. And so while ideologically, I think you've got a potentially wonderful idea, I see no practical way to get there. I'm not convinced that it is a good idea to try. I think a better idea is to say, yes, there are these societal gender roles. And yes, there is a social construct of race, but we need to get to the point that while we recognize the differences, we need to listen to Forrest Valkai and acknowledge that the differences are negligible and unimportant in our daily interactions, and we shouldn't be considering that. I think we're close to the same page there. You've got a really good ideological, oh, I really wish it was this way. That doesn't mean there's any practical way to get there. By the way, Forrest's last name is Valkai. I wasn't mocking you. I was just having fun with the fact that you said it wrong and people laughed.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. I thought it was Valkyrie,
No worries.
but yeah, Valkyrie.
No, it's
Yeah,
funny.
sorry.
I'm sure Forrest will laugh. You're probably not the first one with Forrest Valkai.
Yeah. If you have anything else you want to add, Dirk, go ahead. But I think, I don't know how much more we can really get into this, because like, I think we largely agree that a gender abolished society would be better than the one we're living in, but it's not the one we're living in. And so I'd rather contend with things as they are than how I want them to be, you know?
And while it may be better than what we have, that may not be the better that we should be aiming for, but I'm not sure.
Well, thank you for your insight. The second part was the medical industry is sad. And by that I mean is that I think the medical industry has grown, if they ever were warm, but I think they're certainly cold now, and they are exploitative. And I am concerned. You know, you spoke last time about this caller about what sort of things they would not do for children. And the first thing that popped into my head was wisdom teeth removal. But again, you know, that's another like controversial thing. But I'm very concerned about the reach of the medical industry and the things that they do to us, you know, under this idea that we have to do this. Does that make sense?
Not really.
The Navy,
Sorry,
the
go
Navy
ahead, Matt.
removed my wisdom teeth when they were a problem.
I don't know if
They
they're trying.
pulled mine out. It was bad. They pulled mine out. It wasn't a problem yet. They're like, this is something we do. It's like prophylactic in case you're going to have problems, you know. And
Derek, did they take an x-ray and look at them before they did it?
Well, I'm sure they did. I don't exactly remember every detail, but
Okay.
I can imagine that.
How old were you?
So I think I was like 14 or 15.
Okay.
Oh, wow.
And you
That's
do
young.
realize that they can tell. So when my brother was little, we went to Disney World or Disneyland, and he just kept complaining all day. My yeggs hurt. My yeggs hurt. Daddy, my yeggs hurt. And Dad was pissed because Dad had to carry him all over Disneyland. And so when it was done, he complained so much that they took him to a doctor. My mom was insistent. Mike, there's something wrong with our son. And Brad, if you're in chat, love you. But my yeggs hurt. And so they took him in and they did x-rays. And what they could tell by looking at him as a child was that he was going to be very tall. He's about 6'3", 6'4", so he's significantly above average. And they could tell that because they can see how much bone growth and space for growth there's going to be. And at the rate that he was growing, it was basically stretching his muscles faster than they could grow. It's possible through x-rays to look into your mouth and see that while you're not having a problem now, you are definitely going to have a problem in 2 years, in 3 years. And it's much easier in many cases to do this operation on a 14-year-old than it is to do it on an 18-year-old, or to wait until there's a medical emergency. Since you're not a dentist, and the person who removed your wisdom teeth is a dentist, do you think it's possible that they did the right thing and you're just uncomfortable with it? Or do you think that dentists are just running around doing it just because?
Well,
Like to get a paycheck.
you've made really good points. I think that they did it because they felt like they needed to, honestly, and in good faith. The second point, do I think dentists are just running around pulling kids' teeth out? Well, I don't know. I've heard about this thing, about women being scheduled for C-sections because the doctors are doing this now because they want to have their weekend off or something, and they don't want to be in the hospital all weekend. And this might be like, well, I guess literally an old wives' tale, but these sorts of stories make me uncomfortable. Like, to what extent?
Then you know what you need to do, Dirk? You need to develop your critical thinking and skepticism skills and go out and do research to find out, is it actually happening and to what extent, so that if it is happening and to an absurd extent, you can then bring it to somebody's attention and maybe get famous, maybe write the article that exposes all. And if it's not happening to that extent, maybe you can stop worrying over things that you don't have enough information about.
Well, these right now are just things I've spitballed, but we do have evidence of them over prescribing oxycodone. What was it? Johnson and Johnson just lost their. So there are examples.
Sure. And I think to throw you a bone, Dirk, I think, to like a Bernie Sanders point, like I also take opposition to the medical industry's advertisement policies. The way they advertise to people feels a little bit predatory and problematic to me. And I hope that we improve all of that. And, it's not going to happen under Trump. It's probably going to get significantly worse with RFK at the head of our Department of Health and Health and Human Services. So, try to survive the next 4 years. But I don't know, Matt, did you have anything else you wanted to add? I think we've got full lines and we probably want to start getting to the rest of the callers.
Well, I do want to get to the other callers. I will ask Dirk a quick question and then we can move on. Dirk, you're a theist, it says here. Do you have any interest in presenting any defense of your theistic view?
Yes, and so my theistic view, it should say that it's New Age. So it is theistic in that we have divine guidance. That is to say, we're not just alone coming up with our own things. I feel like the origin and the concept of gods itself comes from some external source. That's not something we just intuitively.
How do you demonstrate that?
How do I demonstrate that? Well, like in an experiment, I guess. I guess we could.
For clarity, you're saying that you believe in the divine and that God concepts originate from a source outside of humanity. What is your reason for thinking that?
Well, because I don't think that at the time that we were coming up with these concepts in the understanding or whatever, that we were really able to grasp the concepts of infinity and the cosmos to the extent that would be required to have these understandings. Does that make sense? I feel like the very concept of
I
God and
understand what
God.
you're saying. I understand what you're saying. I just find it patently absurd. Here's the thing. We don't know the origin of all religious God beliefs, divine beliefs, but we do have a good understanding of it from a sociological and historical perspective. And so God beliefs can begin from animistic beliefs and spirit beliefs of, hey, you and I are standing here talking, you drop dead. That means that a minute ago, you were moving around and now you're not. And I can't see any change or difference, which means there must be something that I can't see that animates you. And that can easily be labeled as a soul. And then there is, I can run, you can run. I can run faster than you. Arden can run faster than me. Somebody has to run the fastest. Therefore, that would be the ideal. You can build up to the Superman, to the God, without robust concepts of infinity. These are just stories. If you think you're basically, you think that there is divine guidance. I don't know how would you, I don't know how to demonstrate that there is divine guidance, which is the next question I'm going to ask you. So you can think about that while I'm here. And that is, if you think there's divine guidance and your reason is you don't think ancient people could have grasped these concepts, then you don't fundamentally know, and which, by the way, I don't think you're an expert on ancient peoples and what they did and didn't understand. But ancient peoples didn't have to come up with concepts of infinity and robust theologies. Theologies grew as we learned more and they got revised. And the ones that stuck around are the ones that were least subject to falsification. How do you demonstrate that there's ever been any divine guidance at all anywhere in the world?
Okay, so I guess through linking examples in the history of when people associated foreigners or different people with being gods, but then this would be on a level that is different than, say, Christopher Columbus or maybe some other group from Africa going to Ireland and educating those people or whatever it may be. This is on a different level in a way that, like the pyramids, for example, we can't recreate these.
Okay,
These are unexplained mysteries.
stop. I asked you how you would demonstrate divine guidance, and I took notes.
Okay.
You said that it would be your demonstration of divine guidance would be examples of history with people associate foreigners with being gods, different from Columbus or groups going to Africa, different levels in a way that, like the pyramids, there's not a cogent thought in anything you said. And while we don't know specifically instruction for instruction how the pyramids were built, we know how they can be built. And the pyramids don't require any divine guidance. You are, and I don't say this to be insulting or dickish, but you are grossly underinformed in history and sociology, in things like the pyramids and other stuff. And because of the things that you don't know, you are, like all the rest of us, and generally reasonably, reaching conclusions that are wholly unwarranted. You have no way of knowing how to demonstrate that anything divine has ever happened, which is why you fumbled over everything and then went to the pyramids. I highly recommend that you go off and you read some sociological books on the history of religion, and definitely some reading on skepticism and critical thinking, because you're reaching conclusions based on what you don't know. And you're even acknowledging it. You're saying, I believe there's divine origin because I don't think people understood this back when they started coming up with gods. You're taking gaps in your knowledge and you're plugging them with God concepts. That is a God of the gaps fallacy, and it is not a reasonable way to reach a conclusion. We got to move on, Dirk, but thank you for addressing the theism.
Thanks for being a gender
Thank you for
abolitionist.
having me. So, thank you guys. Have a great day. Appreciate it.
See you later.
Yep, you too. Are you? Oh,
yeah,
go ahead.
Okay, I closed the lines. So that means if you can hear me now and you're in the queue, don't drop. We're going to get to you, but there are going to be no new callers coming in. It's funny, the second I closed the line, somebody in chat was like, I agree with Dawkins, I'm going to call in. And I'm like, the lines were open for 2 hours and you didn't call in. And there's somebody already taking your spot on that issue. So
if you agree with Dawkins, you are reasoning fallaciously, because I already completely exposed Dawkins' fallacious thinking. So I don't need somebody to call in to say, I agree with Dawkins, because that would be like someone calling in to say, I agree with the flat earthers. You're just wrong. This will be interesting here. Another theist calling in. Gemini, pronouns they, them, is a theist that says, don't gatekeep transgender folks away from Jesus because Jesus is pro-trans. And I'm glad I'm bald because I would have already ripped my hair out just reading that drivel. How are you, Gemini?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm baffled at how you know that Jesus, first of all, how do you know Jesus is, let alone Jesus is pro-trans?
Because of Mark 12:31.
Gemini, have you called in before? You don't have a call history, but I think I've talked to you before.
I don't think so.
So Mark 12:31 doesn't tell us how you know that Jesus is. Let's look at Mark 12:31 and see what it says about trans people. The second most important commandment is love thy neighbor as the same as you love yourself. Those two commandments are most important. Mark 12:31 doesn't say anything about gender or trans people or anything remotely like that. It just says love thy neighbor. And it also doesn't say anything. It also doesn't say anything about what Jesus does or what Jesus thinks. It's an instruction. Why are you laughing, Gemini? Are you just waiting? Are you just waiting to drop your transphobic bullshit?
It's not transphobic. This is this person. Sorry, they them. Their baba booey is that they scream at us about how we're driving people away from God or whatever. But they're like authentically pro-trans, but they're angry at us for being atheists. That's been their thing.
Well, maybe you should learn how to demonstrate that there is a God and what that God thinks, because Mark 12:31 is about loving your neighbor. Doesn't say or anything at all about trans people, and it's an instruction to people. Whether or not Jesus exists or loves anyone or loves trans people is completely separate from whether or not Jesus is, if he exists, is opposed to trans people.
So what am I supposed to respond to?
I don't know. How do you know that Jesus exists?
I think Bart Ehrman has proved that before.
You think Bart Ehrman has proved that before? Then you are delusional, because Bart Ehrman does not think that Jesus exists. He thinks that Jesus existed and he hasn't proved it. That's just his position. I'm asking you how to demonstrate that Jesus exists right now, today.
Just pray. Pray the Hail Mary. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women. Blessed art the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Just go away. I don't want to talk
to
you.
So you're a Catholic? So you're a Catholic?
Orthodox.
You're Orthodox. Goodbye, you liar.
Yeah. I don't need to talk to people like that.
This is wild. All right, here we try this again. Maureen's a theist, she, her, and wants to ask about they, them. So welcome, Maureen. You're on with Arden Hart.
Hell yeah.
Hello, guys.
Hey.
First, let me say that I'm kind of in the middle of theist to atheist. Since I've been listening to you guys, you're kind of helping me along the way. I have a question about the them. I don't understand it. I don't understand how somebody can be a plural, I guess. That's how I see it. I don't know.
It's not a plural.
Yeah. So
no, it's not.
they them has been used in the singular since like way back in the, I think it was the late 1300s, but it may have been 1400s. It was in Shakespeare. Yeah, the singular they them has been a thing for a really long time.
Okay. So who usually refers to themselves as a they? Is it a trans person usually uses the they them?
Mostly we can get into that. I just want to point out, Maureen, I love the sentence you just gave because you were like, you just did. So who is it that usually refers to themselves as the they them? Are they like, you just did it? You just use the non-binary singular they them in your sentence without even meaning to. But yeah. So non-binary people usually consider themselves trans, but not always. Non-binary people in some cases can be like a person who's assigned female at birth. So like they have always been a girl their whole life, and they don't really want to transition, but they don't really identify with womanhood. And so often those people will consider themselves non-binary, but not trans because, maybe they feel like it's some sort of stolen valor on trans people. I don't think so. But that is what I've heard from a lot of people who would consider themselves non-binary and not trans. That said, I tend to describe trans people as anyone whose gender identity is different from the one that they were assigned at birth. So if somebody is non-binary, to me, that makes them trans. And non-binary people often use they, them, but not always. It really is kind of whatever you want to call yourself. I mean, there's no prescriptive rules to how you have to refer to yourself, right? So it's kind of, I think for people, if this helps, one of my old roommates was non-binary, and the way they described it to me, and this was kind of the way that really got me understanding non-binary people a lot better, was like when I was growing up, it wasn't so much that I knew right away that I was a girl. It was that I knew that I wasn't a boy. I had this huge aversion to being a boy. Whenever I was put in the boys' groups or asked to do boyish things, it just felt wrong to me. And this person was assigned female at birth, and they felt that way about being a girl. But then as they transitioned and people were seeing them as a man, they immediately realized, wow, that feels just as wrong. I feel much better when I can just be myself and not have to aspire to anyone's ideals about what it means to be a man or a woman. And so, I mean, that's not every non-binary person's experience, but I think that is a really easy to grasp way of conceiving of the non-binary person, like somebody who just, whenever they tried to fit into either box, it was just felt really wrong for them. And so they would rather just kind of depart from that whole thing entirely and just be like, I'm just me. I think they, them is what people use. Not necessarily always because it's what people really feel is right for them, although it does in many cases. I think it's more like it is the most accessible, gender neutral pronoun in the English language.
One of my favorite examples ever actually came from Arden, and I may add to it or modify it a little bit, but it came from there. And that is, let's say you're a school teacher and the bell rings and everybody runs out of class, and there's a backpack sitting there. I would pick up that backpack and go, look, someone left their backpack. I hope they are still around so I can find them and give this to them. And I do all that because I am unsure about whether I'm talking about someone who uses he pronouns or she pronouns, he, him, he, she, her. And so that's a prime, easy example, which you also did just when talking, of here's a singular they, them. And there are people, by the way, who we have neo pronouns. They've made up new pronouns like Zer, there's a whole bunch of them, and people can do whatever. And it's an attempt to say, I don't feel like he, I don't feel like she. And so I'd rather go for the uncertain one, the nondescript one, whether or not your concept of non-binary or my concept of non-binary matches what's in their head. The reality is they do not identify as a man or a woman. They can switch at different times or whatever, or maybe they do on some days, or maybe they feel more one way than they do the other. But at the end of the day, just out of respect for not wanting to put them in the wrong bucket, we have the general kind of ungendered bucket that we use whenever we don't know.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I see where I was making my mistake. Yeah. They isn't a plural. The term non-binary, is that you're saying is that it's a person who hasn't chosen or can't, I don't know, want to say it wrong, but can't decide whether they're a he or a she? Is that a non-binary?
No, I wouldn't describe it that way. Yeah, I don't know if I would quite describe it that way, but don't worry about, Maureen, if you're coming here honestly just wanting information and you're not coming here with like a conclusion to be cruel, you don't have to worry about saying the wrong thing. I want to help you get that information, and you seem like a very honest person. I've heard your past calls. I think I've produced almost all the times you've called in, so I've heard you quite a few times. Yeah, so it's really like, did that thing I was talking about earlier of like not identifying with man or woman, did that make sense to you? Like,
I think it would be, it's hard for me to think of someone being, I don't know, so, I don't want to say mixed up, but so unsure that they can't, pick one or the other. I mean, that must be scary in a way.
Yeah, I don't know if it's mixed up or like they can't pick. I think rather it's like they know who they are and they feel comfortable with who they are internally. But it's that when they go out into society and somebody says, like, for example, my friend who was, assigned female at birth and they transitioned, like when they were looking for shaving stuff in the aisle, right? Like a man who was also there looking would talk to them and be like, well, you look too young to be looking for shaving stuff. And they would feel like that made them feel gross because, they're not trying to fit this guy's ideal of masculinity, but because he thinks they're a man, he thinks that they're a young, effeminate looking man. And that makes him feel gross. But he also knew that being a woman was not right for him. Like he had dysphoria about his body. And so their body, wow, I just misgendered them right here. See how easy that is. But like, yeah, so I think it's not so much that it's like being confused or mixed up. It's more that whenever people try to put them in a box, it feels wrong. And I think they would just rather be like, I am just me. I am not the boxes you're trying to put on me. And so I would rather you just call me they, them. I want to be outside of the boxes that you're trying to put me into. Does that make sense?
When you hear people...
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah, when you hear people talk about all of a sudden there's 23 genders, there are some people who may not know whether they would prefer to be in the man bucket or the woman bucket. There are other people who know they don't want to be in either. And one of the other great examples about talking about transness, for lack of a better term, is handedness. There are some people who are right-handed. There are some people who are left-handed. There are some people who are ambidextrous. And you don't necessarily know whether somebody's right-handed, left-handed, or ambidextrous, and you may not have any way to tell because it's not just which hand are they writing with or which hand do they catch a ball with, because some people might write with one hand and catch with another one. Some people might have a dominant right eye, and that tends to make their right arm more dominant, but they may be left-handed. If I am right-handed and right eye dominant, if my right arm gets lopped off, I don't become left-handed. I'm still right-handed as my dominant hand because that's the way my brain works, but I will have to learn to live life left-handed. And there are people who have been denied care, who are being essentially forced to live their life wrong-handed because society won't allow them to live their life correct-handed. And then there are people like Lux, I apologize if I'm misspeaking on behalf of Lux or anybody else, but there are people like Luxander, who's on Transatlantic Colin Show, who might view themselves as ambidextrous, or I'm not handed at all. Like I don't have a dominant hand. I'm bad with both hands. Who knows?
I'd rather use my feet.
Sorry, Lux, that wasn't you.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I was in school, left-handed, and I'm left-handed, they used to try to make you right-handed. I mean,
Yeah.
that was a thing.
Yep.
That
And then
honestly,
none of
that
you
is
smack your
a
hand with a
great
ruler.
analogy for the like social isolation that I think trans people feel when somebody tries to make you a man or make you a woman. It's like trying to make you right-handed when you're left-handed. It's like, sure, I can kind of learn how to be a man. I can learn how to play along, but like fundamentally, I always know deep down that being a woman is where I fit. Like that is what applies to me the best. And yeah. Also, Maureen, I have a question. Are you available at 2 p.m. Central Time tomorrow?
At 2 p.m.?
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, tomorrow,
Yep.
myself and my co-host that Matt was just mentioning, Luxander, who is non-binary, will be hosting the Transatlantic Call-In Show. So if you wanted to call in and talk to a non-binary person yourself, that you could call us there. We would love to talk to you.
Yeah, they may
Okay.
have better answers than either of us.
Yeah. You know what? I like listening to you guys. You guys explain things nicely. I can understand. And I think I've had always an understanding that non-binary or trans exists because I think there's a little bit of, if you want to call it male and female in all of us. I mean, I sometimes feel one way and other times I'm just the girly girl. You know what I mean?
I totally agree.
Identify. Yeah, I think that's in everybody, and I think anybody who denies that is just being ridiculous. So I think
it's one of the things that I find. Sorry, go ahead, Maureen.
Go on. No, go on.
I think one of the things that I find most frustrating is it seems so difficult for people to grasp transgender, and yet they grasp ambidexterity, they grasp bisexual and pansexual. There are so many categories where we typically have a binary or we have a normative binary, and yet there are exceptions. And in those cases where there are exceptions, it's like, hey, I'm straight. Hey, I'm gay. Well, I'm pan and I'm bi. Hey, I'm a man. Hey, I'm a woman. Hey, I'm non-binary. Hey, I'm not sure what the fuck I am. I don't care about your categories. I'd just like to live my life and wear what I want to wear and be left alone. And some people are more opposed to it than others. And at the core of most transphobia and at the core of why they focus on trans women is disguised homophobia, which is why they come at me and they're like, you're gay, homie, as if it would bother me to be gay. It's just weird.
Yeah. Do you think a lot of the transphobia just comes mostly from religious people because of their religious beliefs, or do you think that other people who aren't religious might have some phobia?
I think originally probably the initiation of the cultural pushback on trans people came from religion and from religious sort of rebuke. But I think more broadly now, it has kind of become this internet pseudo-intellectual, like, how would you say it, like counterculture kind of position to take, where it's like, oh, they like to frame society as being so woke now, and they just want trans people everywhere, that now it's like the edgy position to be counterculture and to be against trans people. But it's ironic because trans people are still marginalized. We're still, denied, we're still homeless more often than our cisgender peers from getting like kicked out of our homes as teenagers. And we're still, have a harder time keeping a job and all of these things. Like, society is not woke and accepting of us at all, but that is the framing. So yeah, I think there's sort of an internet debate, pseudo-intellectual counterculture thing that is informing a lot of it right now. And that's kind of what I would frame like Elon Musk and Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris in kind of that bucket, where I think they feel like it's a countercultural thing that they have to push back on because it's going too far, when it's in fact not even really starting for trans people. I mean, like we've made progress for sure. I mean, the fact that I was able to transition at 22 is already so much better than so many of the people in the generation ahead of me, who probably waited until their 50s and 60s to start transitioning. But yeah, it's
you can't even imagine.
Yeah, that's
Like
it's really hard, but
to kind of answer Maureen's question, I would have just reactively said that, yeah, most of this comes from religion, except that there's a significant portion of the secular atheist community, including Dawkins, Harris, others, who are engaged in transphobia to varying degrees in support of gender critical stuff and everything else. So I'm no longer comfortable just saying, yep, it's primarily religious. What I would say is that the flawed thinking and the fear and bigotry that drive that for the religious clearly exist and drive that for the non-religious as well.
Yeah, I think society always has to have a boogeyman, and I think right now it's the trans people that are, are the target of the
I think
fear
you
and
may be
phobia.
correct.
Yeah, the person who I started the Transatlantic Call-In show, the Thursday show on this network with, her name is Katy. She always called it the trans panic, and I think that is such an accurate way to describe it. It's kind of like the satanic panic from back in the day. It's this this cultural like miasma. People are buying into so many layers of lies and misinformation about trans people that it's caused this like mass delusion, for lack of a better word, about what trans people are and what we're asking for from society. And they would rather stoke fears about, how trans women are going to assault you in the bathroom and take your daughter's soccer trophy. And it's sad because, trans people should be allowed to win a soccer game in the 5th grade, and trans people should be allowed to pee at the airport, when they're in between a state that lets them pee in the bathroom and a state that doesn't. Like, these things shouldn't be a problem, but because of lies and misinformation, they are. And that's kind of why I think calling it the trans panic is a really good linguistic tool.
That's a good description. That's a good description, yeah. Well, thanks, guys, for, I don't understand why people have to constantly belittle somebody else. I think it's mostly to do with fear, or just wanting to have somebody that they can push around, I guess,
Yeah.
But anyway, thanks, guys.
Thank you, Maureen.
I appreciate you taking my call because like I said, I'm an older person, and this is really new to me. I don't really know any trans. I do have somebody in my family that I have referred to themselves as a they, and I've never brought it up to her and asked her about it. And
to them.
So yeah, what? Excuse me.
No, that's okay. I mean, you're learning, so this is a good opportunity. I would even maybe show them that you called in and asked about this. I think that would be a really good faith way for them to understand that maybe you don't understand things, but you want to, and you want to, do better for them. And I think as a trans person, knowing that somebody would go so far as to call a call-in show to know how to better talk to me would make me trust them a lot in their sincerity.
Okay. Well, maybe I'll do that. I think I'll do that. That's a way to bring it up and be able to talk to her about it, I guess. Anyway, thanks a lot, guys. I appreciate my call.
Thank you, Maureen. You have a good day.
You too. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, you
great.
needed to do it. That's the whole point. I only had her move along, so we didn't keep repeating that little loop at the end there, but Maureen's really sweet. Maureen calls. She's called a couple times lately, and she's doing a lot of deconstruction. I don't need her to be an atheist, but I like that she's evaluating her beliefs, and yeah.
I won't be mad if it happens.
No. So the next 2 calls are interesting. I think they're almost kind of opposites, maybe. But yeah, I think each of these will be really interesting. Let's take maybe the 8-6 first, and then we'll take Ryan last.
Alrighty. Wait, there we go. So Yash, calling from Sri Lanka, pronouns are he, him. How are you?
I'm great. Can you hear me?
Yep, we gotcha.
I can.
Okay, so Matt, you say, I'll just get straight into it. Matt, you say that trans women are women,
Yes.
but Matt, are you willing to take a lie detector test to, really prove to us that you even buy your own bullshit?
Lie detector tests are bullshit. So you're asking me if I would voluntarily engage in a pseudoscientific thing that can't tell you whether or not somebody's telling the truth. Sure, I would, but it wouldn't demonstrate anything because, in much the same way that you're confused and don't understand gender or me or what bullshit is, you don't know that lie detector tests are bullshit.
Well, Matt, I knew you would say this, so I actually Googled this
Did you?
beforehand, and yeah, and lie detector tests have like 90% accuracy. So,
No, I'm sorry, but you're engaged in pseudoscience. Thank you. But what difference does it make
Yeah.
to the issue of gender and sex, whether or not I'm willing to take a lie detector test? Yes, you can put me on a lie detector. Why would that make any difference?
because Matt, I can bet my life on this that you don't even buy your own bullshit.
Okay, Yash, rather
Okay.
than trying to assert what you think Matt believes and engage in mind reading, how about you actually try to make the case for the biological essentialism that you're espousing?
I muted Josh for a second because I want to clarify something really quickly. When you call in and you say that you would bet your life that you know my mind better than I am, then you're either saying I'm a liar, in which case we need to address that, or that you're psychic. So, Yash, are you saying that I'm lying or that you're psychic?
Matt, I believe that you're lying. I think it's written all
Okay.
over your face, and I would bet my life on it.
Okay. Okay. Well, I'm sorry. I hope you don't bet your life because I'm not lying. And while I don't like you and you haven't apologized for calling me a liar, what you're doing is you're not telling anyone anything about me. You're telling everyone, you're telling everyone something about you because you think it's written all over my face that I'm a liar. When I bet you that when I say trans women are women, do you think I'm saying they're cis women?
You think that trans women are actually men, and you just want to be nice to people, and that's
Yash,
why you want to.
No,
is that what
I'm
Matt
sorry,
asked you?
I'm sorry, Yash, but you need to answer the question I ask and not make a different statement. When I say that trans women are women, do you think that when I say are women, that I'm saying they're cis women?
I don't believe in those distinctions. I don't believe in this.
Yash,
I didn't
you
ask.
know what
See,
he's
here you go, Yash.
asking.
I didn't ask you what you believe
So
about those
dishonest.
distinctions. And you've now waited on hold for an hour and 38 minutes to basically say that you are one of the people I described at the beginning in my conversation who will not accept a distinction between trans and cis. And that's because you do not understand and have not studied the actual science. You are essentially a biological essentialist. And what's sad is you're wrong about the biology as well, as Forrest Valkai would explain to you, by going through all the different ways and characteristics by which biology doesn't even produce merely XX and XY. It's not chromosomal, it is not genitalia, none of that is real. So you waited for an hour and 40 minutes to tell on yourself that you just don't understand biology, sociology, psychology, pseudoscience, or my mind. Is there anything else before I hang up on you that you'd like to tell on yourself about?
Well, let me get in before you hang up.
Fair.
Matt, so I think Dawkins understands biology better than you, and
You're actually wrong. While Dawkins understands the bulk of biology better than me, Dawkins clearly is not as accurate on the biology related to sex. But even if he were, gender isn't sex as we're discussing it here. So
Yeah.
instead of you have failed to answer any of my questions, and even when I gave you the best opportunity possible, you just basically tried to say you think Dawkins knows more about this than me. Well, you don't. He doesn't. I'm smarter than Dawkins on a number of different topics. I'm happy to say it. The man is unimpressive in a number of different categories, and this is from someone who's actually had dinner with the man and discussions with the man. However, Dawkins, no matter how smart or impressive he may be in other areas, is irrelevant to what you're saying. I'm going to let Arden talk to you because I don't care what you have to say anymore You've already tattled all over your little self about how little you understand about anything. So what do you want, Hart?
Yeah, I mean, so rather than try to assert what's really in Matt's head, information which you do not have access to, or to just assert that biological essentialism is true because Dawkins knows more about biology than Matt, which is like an appeal to authority fallacy, I would love it if you would just make the case yourself for how gender and sex are the same thing, as stated in your call screen notes here. So go for it.
I would love to, but before that, can I say something?
No, you're going to answer my question.
Okay, so will you at least admit that gender and sex used to be the same thing back then, before all
Yes,
this?
nobody's disagreeing that normatively gender is often used in a way that is synonymous to sex.
Oh, yeah, so it is the same thing.
No.
So the debate's over then.
No, I'm sorry. I don't know
You
if you
just said
can't.
was,
Hold on,
and then you
hold on,
converted
hold on,
was to
hold on.
is.
Yeah. It's also, I said normatively, which means statistically speaking, people might use the word in a certain way. That doesn't mean the two concepts are identical.
So you changed it. You're saying that you changed it. It was something before, and now you're changing it.
What? Oh, the definitions of the word. No. So I think it's fair to say that for a lot of history, gender and sex were used interchangeably. I think there's even reason to believe that when gender, the word, was conceptualized, it was meant to be used as sort of like a more appropriate way to refer to sex. However, as words change and develop over time, like the word phone and like many other words, the conception behind it changes and develops as we get new information and new technology. The word gender has developed and changed.
So you changed it. You are changing it.
Well, no, Yash. It's dishonest when you say you changed it. I didn't do anything. I don't have a magic wand that can cause mass portions of society to reconceptualize their idea of gender. Gender got changed in how it was being used by all of society. I don't know if you understand, Yash, but dictionaries are descriptive of how words are used by populations. And while sure, the biological essentialist version is also in the dictionary because it's describing how the word is often used, my version of gender is also in many dictionaries because it is such a common and prolific usage that it is just an accepted definition of the word gender.
So I really want to have a back and forth. So I would appreciate if you were to try to be more concise.
Well, I would really love to have a back and forth, Yash, but you've repeatedly been dishonest. And when I've said things, you've misframed how I've said it back to me. So it's really difficult to have a nice back and forth when my interlocutor is not really being honest.
So can you tell me who changed it and when it happened?
Yash, you didn't listen to a word I said, did you? Can you repeat back to me what I told you? I would love to hear it. Go for it.
You said that you didn't change anything. You don't have the power to do it. It's as technology, something develops and society develops, it changed on its own, something like that.
Right. So why then would you, after acknowledging that, why then would you say who changed it? When you're acknowledging that the way definitions work, Yash, is that definitions are descriptions of how words are used by populations. So no person changed it. No person came along and decided. People acknowledged that trans people existed and that we needed a way to describe this population of people and the phenomenon around them. And for whatever reason, gender became the word that sort of became the thing that people coalesced around to describe this experience. No single person, no entity, no organization, no group of people did it. Populations at large did this.
By the way, the word computer used to refer to only a person that was computing, and now it's used to refer to something different. Words change.
Well, I think you want gender to be something about how people present themselves.
Yash,
and I just think that
Yash, again, you're saying you want. I don't care what you think about what's in my head or what you think about what's in Matt's head. Can you please honestly contend with the things that we're saying to you?
Can you calm down? I'm not trying to get at you.
Yash,
I'm just
Yash, I don't give a fuck if you
Motherfucker,
think I'm calm or not.
double dog dare you to tell her to calm down again in my fucking presence, you piece of shit.
He can tell me to calm down. I don't give a shit. I'm going to interact
Matt,
with
I
him,
didn't
though.
know you were such a massive white knight. I didn't know that.
I am a
Yash.
white knight.
Okay, actually, you know what? I'm done with Yash because, as I've said many times, I'm just hanging up on him. I'm not even going to give him a last word or anything. Here's the thing, you guys, and I'm going to talk for a minute so I can turn this into a clip and still make it monetized. I am done talking to people who don't want a sincere dialogue, right? I think if I had a conversation with Sam Harris about all this stuff, we would probably walk away still disagreeing on a lot, but I sincerely believe he would have an intellectually honest discussion with me. And while, like, I talked earlier about rationality rules and his discussion with Tom Bogardus, I think is his name, while that guy is, I believe, a Catholic and very biological essentialist in how he views sex and gender, he was an intellectually honest person. Like, Stephen was able to disagree with him and pose things to him, and he actually pondered it and responded, right? I am perfectly happy to talk to people who are biological essentialists about gender and sex. I'm perfectly happy to have a debate and discussion. But Yash is not a person who wants to have a reasonable, good faith discussion about this topic. He's repeatedly asserted what's in Matt's head, what's in my head, rather than responded to the words told me to calm down. He's asserted that I said I changed the word, that someone changed the word, who changed the word. Yash is not an honest interlocutor, and I think this is a good learning moment for everyone in the audience to know that we don't need to be talking to people like Yash. The second you suss out that you're talking to someone like Yash, I think it is not quite a responsibility, but it's bordering on a responsibility to depart from that conversation. The only conversations we need to be having about this topic, a topic that, mind you, treats trans people like we are animals in a zoo being observed and talked about in the hypothetical, when our actual lives are at stake, when our well-being is at stake, our rights and access to healthcare and free access to society is at stake. It is incumbent on you to talk to people who are interested in a good faith discussion. I don't need everyone to agree with me. I don't need everyone to walk away saying, Arden's a woman. Yes, queen. I'm pro-trans now. Let me go donate all my money to the Trevor Project. No. I do need people who are willing to honestly contend with the things I'm saying. I'm not interested in someone who's going to just appeal to Dawkins and assert what's in our head with no evidence to support it. It's dishonest and not helpful to the movement. And I think that is something we all need to be doing, being done with people like Yash and dishonest people. If you're like that, don't call me. And I know you will anyway, because you guys are fucking obsessed. But I'm going to hang up on you the second I sniff it out. So
I live rent-free in their head. I'm a white knight because I like to stand up for my fucking co-hosts and my co-workers and call out the same dishonesty. Oh, yeah, I don't care. In much the same way that, you know, Arden doesn't need you to acknowledge her existence or her gender or anything else. If you think I'm a white knight, cool. You already think you know my mind better than I do. So I'm just going to say yes. I just like Eminem, I am whatever you say I am. If I wasn't, why would I say I am? In the paper, in the news, every day I am. And Yash is still confused and tattling on himself.
you know what? I think
Thanks for
Yash
supporting
is,
our OnlyFans.
Well, not anymore. But
No. I'm just saying that I'm going to put together an OnlyFans for all these people who I live rent free in their head, because they keep sending me emails describing all of the sex acts that they think I'm engaged in. And I'm like, would you take your dick out of your hand before you send that email? I'd like you to just not.
Yeah. Before we move on, people should know we're going to read super chats after this next call. It's going to be the last one. Any super chat of $10 or more, we're going to read live here on air. So if you didn't get to call in, you want to be part of the conversation, or you want to make us say ridiculous things, that is something you can do for $10 or more. All right.
For $10, you can make me say I'm a white knight, and I mean that in the whitest white knight of a way. If you want, you get to do whatever you want. So we have one more call here, and I think it Have you got the schedule? It might be good to remind people that in addition to doing super chats after this is over, and there are tons of ways to support the network. By the way, you can subscribe, you can ring the bell. You can go to patreon.com/calltheline. You can go to linemerch.com. You can just click on links down below in the chat, engage in the chat. All of those things are supportive. So don't think you have to give money, but you have to give money. I'm just doing that because Jimmy forces me to say you have to give us money. You must.
That's true.
What is wrong with you? Why haven't you given us all your money yet? But we got one more call. But Arden has the schedule for this week because this is a call-in show network. And in addition to the Transatlantic call-in show tomorrow with Arden and Luxander at 2 p.m. Central, right here on the same channel. What else we got going on?
So we have that show. That's going to be a really interesting one, of course. Then Sunday at 2 p.m. is going to be Forrest Valkai and Eve Was Framed on the Sunday show. At 7 p.m. at Sunday show After Dark will be Matt Dillahunty and an unconfirmed guest. We don't have Skeptalk sorted. We don't have Eve confirmed for Christmas Eve on Chewed Gum. And I actually don't know that we're going to do an event on Chewed Gum this Tuesday because that's Christmas Eve.
Christmas Eve.
And next Wednesday is Christmas. And I think we might be doing a line event special, which also maybe this is more important than maybe the shows to mention since we don't have the schedule as filled out because of the holidays. If you guys remember last year, we did a big mug sale competition where all the hosts who attended the holiday events designed a mug, and then we competed to see who could sell the most. Well, this year we're doing that again, but not only the hosts who attend the holiday special are going to get a mug design. So a lot of the hosts will be at the holiday events, but everyone's going to get a mug. So whoever your favorite host is, get excited. Almost all of them are done, and hopefully before Sunday show, we will have them released to you guys. So get that money set aside, your extra like $15-20, however much it is for one of those mugs, and get ready because there are some sick designs. They are very fun, and I can't wait for you guys to see them. So, all right, let's take this last caller.
Here we go. Ryan is calling from Utah, pronouns are he, him, an atheist with an issue about biological essentialism. You're on the show with Arden Hart.
Oh, I'm so sorry, Ryan. I had you muted because I had the last caller muted. You are now able to be heard. Why don't you start again for us?
That's fair. Yeah, kind of a train wreck, that one.
No worries. But what do you want to talk about today? I see the call screener notes, but why don't you cue it up for the audience?
Yeah, this is something that would have been more appropriate for the transatlantic call-in show, but the lines are always closed by the time I get off work on Thursdays, so I appreciate you guys
basically made today
having the topic open.
Cis-trans couple version of that.
Yeah, go for it, though. Yeah, we're happy you called in.
Well, so two kind of things I wanted to touch on. The first one in the call notes is addressing a logical argument presented by Josie Caballero when it comes to a lot of the calls that she's had. I've spent the last 3 months catching up on like 9 months worth of shows, just cramming it all in.
Okay.
And the Matthew arc, the Matthew arc of calls, I gotta say, a wild ride to hear those calls over and over again.
Yeah, well, Matthew's not calling in anymore, and we're putting a limit on callers like Matthew, only like a couple times in like a 3 or 4 month period. So hopefully it won't be quite as much of a roller coaster, but anyway, proceed.
Well, not at all. That's the frustrating thing for me is that I feel like I'm a Matthew caller after all of the bullshit's been worked out already. Like I've already deconstructed from Christianity. I've already accepted trans people. I'm on board. But the argument specifically I wanted to talk to Josie about, and I guess you guys, she'll often say, when you get a caller to accept that sex and gender are two different constructs, that sex is the kind of biological traits that we compile to create classifications of people, usually split between male and female, and then also intersex. And then gender the kind of social recognition of behaviors and mannerisms and appearance and presentation that have almost nothing to do with your biological sex. That's gender. When you acknowledge that these two things are different, Josie follows up with, so some women have a penis and some women don't. And that's a logical argument. And I've heard her say that a half dozen times, and it frustrates me because I'm not a student of logic, but the first thing that pops in my head is that that's a non sequitur. That her conclusion, therefore, some women have penises and some women don't, doesn't follow from the first thing she said.
So,
am I correct?
I think there might be a step missing in there somewhere, but I know what you're saying, and I don't always. I mean, this is why we have multiple hosts, because I don't tend to use the same strategies that Josie does, and we've disagreed on the show several times about the different things. Yeah, I don't think it necessarily follows immediately that just because you establish sex and gender are different, that necessarily trans women can fall under that category. I think there's another step that would have to happen there, but I don't think it's a big step to then say, you know, if we can acknowledge that sex and gender are different, and we accept that trans people are people whose gender identity aligns with, you know, a gender that is different than the one they were assigned at birth, then trans women can fall under that category. So I don't think it's that much of a leap, but I think there's like maybe a missing step in there. Maybe that's the issue. I don't know. I'm kind of arguing as a proxy, so it's a little bit difficult to know exactly what I'm doing here.
It's not fair, I know. But let me see if I can fill in that gap. So if I was to construct this as a syllogism, which don't beat me up too bad, Matt. So if premise one is sex and gender are different sorry, what?
Nothing. Ignore me.
Go ahead.
Oh. So if premise one is sex and gender are different constructs, premise two could be a person's gender is not contingent on their biological sex. Then you could have the conclusion a person of any gender can have genitals typical of any of the sexes. And that could translate into some women have a penis and some women don't.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of what I was trying to get at, that the only missing step in there is that is you know, linking trans women to having the gender of women, which I think is evident in both a non-biological essentialist definition of woman or gender, and in like the literature for the evidence of trans people. I think you could support that premise with plenty of evidence, but again, still kind of arguing as a proxy. So I'm like a little bit trepidatious because this isn't exactly the approach that I would use.
So how would you guys then approach that second middle part, a person's gender is not contingent on their biological sex? Because that seems to me to be the biological essentialist part, where you argue with people that say that, no, your biology, your gender is contingent on your biology. If you have a penis, therefore you are a man by by dependency. So how do you guys separate that so that it's not contingent?
So I tend to approach this usually, if I'm following correctly, by getting into the construct of gender identity, which is let's see, it is a durable psychological construct that is a deeply ingrained sense of self that informs how they relate their biological sex to like societal and cultural understandings of gender roles and expectations. And that woman and man are types of gender identity. And we already know that trans people are people who are, you know, and this is from, if you want, we can try to get into more of the literature. Again, I'm trying to save space because we're doing a proxy argument here. I think the literature well establishes that trans people exist and that the construct of gender identity has been one that was developed in the literature to help explain trans people, much like depression and personality are constructs that are developed in the literature to explain trends in people, and that trans people have a gender identity that is usually, or some people who are trans can have a gender identity that is more aligned with the sex that they were not assigned at birth. So like women, right, typically is a gender identity that typically is aligned with the female sex and all of the aesthetics and things that are around that. And but the typically is doing the heavy lifting there, because you have intersex people who might not neatly fit in that definition, who are clearly and kind of uncontroversially women, and I think trans people would be part of that exception to the typically.
I know it's kind of hard to make an analogy for things that are so unique, but what do you think about using mother as an analogy to explain how biological essentialism doesn't really work in practicality? Because the word mother would mean the parent that gave birth to a child.
Ryan, I feel like you've been watching me on TACIS. I developed this argument like 6 months ago and started using it on TACIS. And I brought it up with Matt the second I thought of it. We were like, oh my God, yes, that is it. Because exactly, mother typically refers to the person, you know, if you want to get really biological essentialist about it, you could be like the person who provided the large immobile gamete of your two parents, right? Your two biological parents. But obviously, mom or mother refers to more of a socially constructed category. Someone, you know, it could be your aunt, it could be your grandma, it could be the lady who runs an orphanage, it could be just some woman in your community who took care of you. It generally just kind of refers to a woman or a like feminine person who is the caretaker to a child. I've used that argument a lot on TACIS, that I think mother is a great example of how both biological essentialism are problematic and how definitions are necessarily like incomplete. Like you're always going to have, when you're talking about definitions, people who should fit in that don't by the strict terms of the definition, and people who do fit in that shouldn't.
Yeah. And not just, you know, not just social usages of the word mom, but also different legal definitions when it comes to adopted mothers or stepmothers or surrogate mothers, those who are, you know, you might have donated an egg, so you're biologically the mom, but someone else carried it to term, and then maybe someone else raised it. So you could have 3 different moms for one person. And, you know, which one is the biological one is kind of hard to exclusively pinpoint. So you have these different kinds of moms. Some of them are, you know, social or legal or cultural. And I think you could say the same thing about definitions of women. You've got the different categories, whether it's, you know, tall women, short women, gay women, cis women, trans women.
Yeah, I think so. This is part of the reason why I've been trying to kind of work on developing my own sort of more philosophical definition of woman, because I think it would be useful. But I tend to just kind of concede the ground of that. I think normatively, the definition of like adult female human is sufficient to describe most humans. But then we have to start getting into what is a female, what is an adult. What, you know, you can get into what is a human if you want, but I don't think that's as necessary for the purposes of the debate. And that like those definitions work like a population level most of the time. But the problem is things that work at the population level often break down when you focus in on individuals within the population. And like a great example that I think breaks both woman and mother is people with Swyer syndrome. There are people who are XY chromosomally, but I can't remember if it's that their SRY gene isn't activated or if that it's not present or something like that. But they're basically, they're chromosomally male, but they are phenotypically female. And while it's not incredibly common for people with this condition. There have been several instances of those people getting pregnant and carrying the child successfully to term. So that is a person who is the provider of the large immobile gamete, but they're not a female by, a strict biological essentialist definition of the term. And they are able to become a biological mother. Like, it breaks all of those terms, right? So I think it's just the hard thing to notice is that, like, or when you're in this discussion, is that people really want this like clean definition that feels like I've done my work, adult human female. But even under those definitions, I think it ends up breaking down into like a social definition. Again, I'm citing just because it's fresh on my mind and I watched it just like yesterday, but the rationality rules thing was talking about how, the definition of an adult is very socially constructed. And while you may be an adult in the US, you could fly to another country where you're not an adult, or where, maybe you're not an adult in the US and you are in another country. So does that mean that like you're a woman in a country where, the age of adulthood is 14, but you're not in the US? Like, it doesn't, like, even that, like, what feels like a clean biologically essentialist definition, this adult female human, ends up falling back on like social construction to kind of support it. So yeah, I think I don't know. I'm never sure what it's kind of, I always try to evaluate based on who I'm talking to, what I think is going to be the most effective strategy. I think when you're talking to someone who is philosophically literate and who is actually really an honest interlocutor, coming up with your own definition of woman can be an effective thing. Like, that's what Stephen Woodford does a lot. But I also think that when I'm talking to someone who's maybe a little bit newer to this conversation, it's easier to just kind of defer to the adult female human definition and talk about why that definition is often insufficient, even on their own terms, to categorize, to really capture the full scope of what womanhood is.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I apologize I didn't catch you already using the mother analogy, but I hope that argument gets a little bit more screen time on the show, because it really feels like a banger to me.
I'll try to use more.
Another thought I just had when you were talking about like Sawyer syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
When we're looking at, people will say, oh, there's male and female and that's it. And
Mm-hmm.
then you'll bring up things like, well, there's the intersex conditions. And they're like, well, those are the exceptions. So they're willing to accept that there's male and female and nothing else except the exceptions.
Yeah.
And then they'll stop talking about them. Is it fair to compare, like, you're talking about sex, intersex people are the exceptions. So if you're talking about gender, are trans people the exception? When you're talking about like those normative boxes of who fits in what.
Yeah, that's how I tend to think about it.
Categories. Is comparing those two categories a good way to get people to accept that trans people exist the way that they acknowledge that intersex people exist?
Which two categories?
Mother and gender?
Sorry. So when you're talking about the category of sex and people just want to say there's only male and female, they will acknowledge that intersex people exist. So
Right.
Are trans people the kind of equivalent exception when you're talking about gender and the category of men?
Yes.
And the categories of men and women?
Yeah, that's
Yes.
how I tend to think about it.
Is that useful?
Yeah, no, I think so.
Well,
Go ahead, Ben.
I would hope so. At this point, I live in a world where facts may or may not be useful, where
Right.
sound arguments may or may not be useful. So when you're talking about it, is that going to be effective? It absolutely should be.
Mhm.
Recognizing, see, this is the thing. Let's get right back to the very beginning of the show when Richard Dawkins, one of the world's most prominent biologists, gets the biology wrong, because he will say there are two biological genders. And okay, Richard, how are they defined? Oh, chromosomally. Yes, but there's not just XX and XY. There's XYY and others. Well, we don't get to, those are exceptions. Yes, but now what it is not that sex is um, wow, that it's not just that there are two sexes. There are two sexes if you ignore the other ones. You don't. You can say normatively sex is dimorphic, because normatively doesn't mean absolute. It means, hey, when we take the whole thing, we look at the bulk of the bell curve, we look at the bulk of the data that fits into here, and we're basically going to throw out the outliers. When it comes to people, and when it comes to accuracy, you do not get to throw out the outliers. I literally just posted a video on this topic about not dismissing the outliers. So when it comes to sex, Richard throws out the outliers in order to say sex is, dimorphic. And they'd like to say that because sex is dimorphic, gender is dimorphic. But in the same way, as you astutely pointed out with an analogy, it's the exceptions that we're talking about.
Yes.
Trans people are the ones that don't fit into the buckets. And you could say gender is normatively dimorphic, just like sex is normatively dimorphic. But you have to acknowledge that when you do that, you are throwing out 1% of the population at least. And if that analogy should hold for people, even though arguments from analogy are always going to fall apart and it's problematic, but it's good. And this is why when you say something like premise 1, gender and sex are not identical. Premise 2, sex is delineated by chromosomes, which isn't true, but we'll just go there. Therefore, gender is not delineated by chromosomes. Now you can replace chromosomes with penises. Sex is delineated by penis. Sex is delineated. There are primary and secondary sex characteristics. So the entirety of sex, biological sex, is more complicated than Richard will acknowledge. And the reason Richard won't acknowledge it, if you'd have asked him 20 years ago, he would have given an entire lecture. And I'm sure if somebody digs around and finds him talking about sex, there's something out there about him talking about the exceptions. There's something out there in the books about him talking about exceptions. Then why is it now at 83 fucking years old, when he's sidling up to gender criticals, is he suddenly sex is dimorphic? Let's just not worry about all those other things. I'm not going to go back and reread all of his books, but I guarantee you he said something like that at some point.
I would even take it a step further to say that, like, not only is it appropriate to bring up the exceptions, and not only should it be compelling, but I think it is the entire point, right? Like, the whole point of this discussion is trying to delineate the boundaries of what is a woman, what is a man, what is a gender, what is sex, who is included and who is not. It seems to me that if we're trying to look for the line on these things, the exception should be exactly where we look to understand these things and exactly what the boundaries of these categories are. I find it frustrating when people try to say, well, sure, there are exceptions, but they're such a small percent, they don't matter. And again, when you're talking about like research, right? When we're, like I was saying earlier, these definitions, these concepts of looking at sex in a binary way work on populations. Like, it's fair to say that at a population level, generally, there are male and female, and those are generally the categories, right? But when you zoom into an individual, that's when you have people who have like androgen sensitivity syndrome or Swyer syndrome or any of these other things where they don't neatly fit into the definition that we want them to, or people who have like ovotestes, right? They have both gametes at the same time. Like, biology is so diverse and so fascinating. And while, yes, they are a small portion of the population, when we're trying to delineate these categories, you need to look at the edges. That's the whole point. We're looking for the edge, and then we see an edge, and Richard Dawkins and the gender essentialists go, no, don't look at the edge, it's the edge. Like, that's the whole effort that we're embarking on, is finding where the edge of this category is. And the second we see it, you turn away in horror. It is the entire point, as far as I can tell.
Last little bit from me in response to Josie's. Josie isn't presenting premise 1, premise 2, but her shortened version where some women have penises. Here's part of a syllogism. Apples and Fergalburgle are not identical. If apples are food, what conclusion can you reach about Fergalburgle? Nothing. You can't tell me that Fergalburgle is food or it's not food. And so if you said apples and peanut butter are not identical, apples are food, you can't then conclude that peanut butter is food from that syllogism. But because we're already familiar with peanut butter, we know it's food. And so we conflate that because we do a shorthand, because the actual synthetic content of what's in the argument is familiar. And so if you said sex and Fergalburgle are not identical, sex is delineated by chromosomes, what can you tell me about Fergalburgle? Nothing. But when you sub the word gender in there because people think they know what it is, they smuggle that baggage into their assessment.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why we have to be diligent about fallacies and about teaching people how to engage and address those things. Anyway, that's all I had.
It's hard when you're arguing with people who don't know that Fergalburgle is Manergalburgle.
True.
Uh-huh. I also think that...
But
oh, sorry. Go ahead, Brian. We've talked a lot. I wanted you to respond.
I already forgot what I was going to say.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
We do that to each other all the time. It's one of the reasons we get along so well is because we love each other enough to forgive each other when we interrupt and make the other person forget what the fuck they were saying.
Well, if you think of it, Ryan,
it was going to be attempt at something funny that probably wouldn't be.
Okay. I was just going to say that I think all of this is my frustration with all of this also is that, you know, I love philosophical discussions. I would love to sit around and discuss like the boundaries of what is a woman and where do those boundaries lie and what is a definition that actually encompasses like all cultures throughout history, you know? So we're not like our concept of gender isn't breaking down when we look down through the past and into the future and across cultures and things like that. But it's also like, I don't really care what individuals think a woman is, right? Like, I just want to live my life. And the frustrating thing is that like all this conversation is interesting and I do enjoy getting into the philosophy of it all, but it's all tied up in human rights. And I really wish people would recognize that like what a woman is to me is one of the least meaningful questions in this issue. Like, I think there are some questions that probably deserve a little bit more attention and nuance on like a policy level and things like that. But this what is a woman thing is really a cudgel. And I wish we didn't spend as much time on it. And I know we opened the floor to this show today, so I'm not trying to like call you out. Like, you did the right thing. You called in with an appropriate topic. But yeah, I'm just, it's frustrating that it's like, again, like I was saying earlier, feeling like an animal in a zoo. Like, I just want to live my life, but instead I'm having to defend whether or not I'm a woman. And then sometimes people say I'm a woman, but the trans woman who doesn't pass as well as I do is not a woman. And it's like, ugh, this is so silly. Like, I don't actually really believe that most of these people sincerely like care about this issue. I think they just want to make trans people feel like shit. And that's kind of the ultimate goal of a lot of these discussions. But I do interest in it. Like, talking with like philosophically literate people about this conversation is a really good time. So yeah, I appreciate it, Ryan.
I do wish that the whole civil rights part of it wasn't an issue and we could just talk instead about how excited you are about the new Pokemon Legends game that's going to be coming out.
I haven't heard about it. What? Excuse me?
Yeah, Pokemon Legends Arceus is going to have a sequel. It's Pokemon Legends ZA. It's
shit.
supposed to be, the Pokemon X and Y that never got a third release.
Yes.
It's supposed to have a lot of the
doing
content.
this to us?
See,
Pokemon
I
Legends ZA should be coming out this year, 2025.
This is what I'm talking about, Ryan. I want to talk about my fucking Emerald Tree Skinks. Oh, their light went off, so it's not as easy to see them. I want to talk about my fucking lizards, and I want to talk about Pokemon, and I want to talk about, like, music and theater and, like, the things that actually matter to my life and who I am as a person. But instead, I spend so much time debating HUDs and right-wingers, it's synonymous, but about what is a woman, because it might inform how they vote. And my hope is that, like, either they will influence someone or somebody watching will hear it and be influenced. And like, I do think that ultimately it's probably a net positive, but man, it is such a drain on my like mental health. Like you can't be in this state of like, you know, heightened, or like, I don't mean arousal in like a sexual sense, but you know what I mean? Like the cortisol filled kind of mindset all the time. It's like biologically, neurologically bad for you, but you know, I mean, it's the world we live in.
Make a difference, and it's made a difference for me personally, especially the transatlantic call-in show. Though
that means a lot.
I think
Thank
I
you.
do get to say I've been a little bit butthurt by Matt for a while.
Oh yeah. Well, fair enough.
What
a lot
did
of
I
people.
do?
Long time. I'll tell you real quick. A long time ago, when you were on a show that must not be named, I was calling in with honest questions about trans people, and apparently referenced some dog whistle I wasn't aware of. So you plugged into the call screener room and said that you weren't interested in talking to a bigot, and you hung up on me.
Hooked.
Cool. I'm not
Okay,
sorry.
the transatlantic call-in show has
I'm
answered
sorry.
those questions.
It went down that way. But yeah, depending on how, I'd have to go back in time and see how he phrased it. So at least now I can say you definitely know how to address the issues and bring up what you're talking about and making it clear that you are on the right side. So
I appreciate
we
it.
moved
And I
past
won't take up any more of you guys' time tonight. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Ryan.
Sweet.
Call back
Thanks,
anytime. I really enjoyed this call.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, you know, I'm sorry things went down that way, but I'm not sorry for doing what I did, because odds
Yeah.
are good that if somebody in the call screening thing messed up with a dog whistle, especially on shows where we are constantly getting pranked, trolled, harassed, you know.
Better to get a false positive on the bigotry than to let somebody say something awful on air.
Yeah, and in some cases we didn't always have full on screener or anything, and so it would be before the show I'd see who was queuing up, and I'm like, oh no, fuck no, we're not doing that, and I'd just clear that up ahead of time, so it doesn't even make the air. So it's nice that Ryan was upset about something that didn't even make the air, and then moved on and got over it. We have finished all of our calls.
I just noticed a chatter said, Sam Harris says hi. I'm going to guess you're a troll and that you actually have no connection to Sam Harris at all. But under the off chance that you are, I hope that he watches this and realizes that we were, I feel like, giving good faith critique. I don't think Sam Harris is a bigot per se. I think he's bought into some bad ideas. And I really feel like if he sat down with like an honest, like actual trans activist and not just his sort of, sorry, but elitist friends, I think that there could be a lot of understanding that could be reached, even if we don't walk away with the same views. So, yeah, that is my...
I've always had good interactions with Sam. And that's why, you know, even when I told him to fuck off with that bullshit, hopefully Sam knows and understands. I mean, it's the way I address things, but genuinely, I think it was a terrible mistake and incredibly poor to, hey, what went wrong with the Democrats? It was all the trans stuff fault. When you're now attacking the people who are responding to the lies and the attacks. I'll agree with you. Social media is a fucking cesspool. It's making us dumber all the time. And I think that the dead internet theory, while I don't think it's actually rises to the state of a theory, it's a speculation. I think it is somewhat true in many regards, and that is that so much of the content is just generated AI shoveled out or humans shoveled out just for trolling and engagement and to get clicks, that the number of honest people engaging has gone down. Now here's Sam, who's one of the people that I would have considered an honest person engaging. And what's he doing? He's shoveling out the propaganda, the lies. This is not a thing of, you know, 4-year-olds in the wrong body type stuff. It's definitely not a thing that there was a biological male that was punching women in the face at the Olympics. And as a matter of fact, the closest that anyone came to that is someone who is suing J.K. Rowling and others for misgendering them and attacking them. This is a woman by everything that we can measure or identify. And by the way, what fucking difference does it make? You don't have a right to know somebody's DNA, their chromosomes, their genitals, how they were raised, none of that stuff. And there's nothing about this, even as Arden was pointing out, there's nothing about this. Her opponent, he was even pointing out, hey, she hits like a Mack fucking truck, but I was wrong to suggest that this wasn't, that this was unfair or that she wasn't a woman, because that's not the case. They knew each other.
Yeah.
Anyway, we can do better.
I had a thought and it went away. Yeah. I thought it was a good show. I had a lot of good conversations. I do wish the one spot that we had to somebody who was espousing biological essentialism went to someone who was more honest. Because I saw people in the chat who said, like, I agree with Dawkins, and I asked them to call in, and then, like, the lines got closed because it was too late. I would have liked to have talked to someone who was a little bit more sincere on that position than somebody who just wanted to be like, Matt, I don't even believe you believe your own bullshit. Like, okay, I don't believe what you think he believes. That's so not a meaningful conversation for us to have, but okay.
I mean, it's a great first line that lets me know I don't have to take anything else you say seriously when you're like, would you be willing to take a lie detector test to show that you believe your own bullshit? Because what you've just said is, would I take a lie detector test to show that I believe my own bullshit, which means you're asserting that what I believe is bullshit, which means you're just dismissing it, which means you're not willing to argue and debate it.
Yeah.
And you acknowledge that. And so, hey, would you be willing to take a lie detector test to say that you believe your own bullshit, that you actually believe that you can read my mind? Would you be willing to take a lie detector test that you've never watched trans porn?
Oh, the thing I was going to say was about, there's a lot of criticisms I have about how Dems talk about trans issues, and I wish they would change a lot of that, but probably disagree with Sam on exactly what I think the solutions are. I wish they would talk more like AOC, who AOC takes nobody's bullshit. She's like, how the hell would you enforce some sort of gender bathroom rule? It's sick. It seems like it involves genital inspections. It's perverted. You guys are freaks. Like, I love that. She takes nobody's bullshit. She's not claiming that trans women are in fact women or, whatever. And I think she has before, but she's not trying to make some philosophical argument. She's just trying to be like, you guys are attacking, like we talked about before, one Congress member who's probably a top 5% earner in the entire US, rather than like making deals with politicians in nearby states about like trade agreements that could benefit people in your state, like anything that would actually matter to your constituents. Instead, you want to talk about this bullshit. Anyway.
Oh, did you already talk about what's her name and the handwriting?
Oh, Nancy Mace. Yeah, she posted a picture of like some writing outside of her house that was like giving her shit. And somebody compared the letters between a known example of her handwriting and the letters on the pavement. And the A was like unmistakably the same. And she was already kind of getting like suspected when she said that like a trans activist assaulted her, that and she wore the sling the next day. And she was like, oh, people were like, is this real? And all like some alleged bystanders said it seemed like a handshake. There was no reason to believe it was anything other than a handshake. But apparently it was so bad it wrecked her arm. So no, I mean, Nancy Mace ran as a politician initially as a like bisexual, pro-choice, pro-LGBT, but I think she was still a Republican, but she was like, there's a quote from her that's something to the effect of like, I support LGBT people's right to be as happily or unhappily married as the rest of us, or something like that, which is like, to me, that's what I want from Republicans. Like, you don't have to like gay marriage. You can still be a Republican who's like a conservative Christian who's against gay marriage, but that you acknowledge that it's not your place to push your religious belief about how other people should be married in an ideologically diverse country. Like, anyway, sorry, like 18 sidetracks. ADHD. Let's look at super chat. You want to go first?
Sweet. $10 from Greg Markowski. And thank you again, Greg. I hope we get to hang out with you again soon. Merry Christmas, Matt and Arden, and everyone at the line. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much,
You
Greg.
enjoy your holidays as well.
Oh, forgot you have the super chats here. I was like, how did that just happen? $10 from Etienne Unsen. I noticed a lot of atheists claiming that gender is a made-up thing, like souls. What is the best way to tackle this? Thanks, and ho ho ho, you're gay homies. Yeah, so I think this would be good for a call if you're able to call, but like try to do an elevator pitch here. When we say something is socially constructed, that is not the same as saying it's made up. Like money, time, and countless other issues, age, race, are all socially made up, but they're clearly correlating to some real world phenomenon. And to say that it's like a soul, we have no evidence for a soul. We do have evidence for people experiencing some phenomenon like a gender identity.
Yep.
Evidence would be the
there's
difference.
probably potentially a lot more to that, but yeah, I think that covered all of it perfectly. Thanks.
That was my elevator pitch. Yeah.
$10 Canadian from Quantum Chaos. Even if Harris lost because she's too supportive of trans people, so what? Amen.
Bang.
We don't stop supporting someone's right to exist because politically inconvenient. The appeasements reek of the 1930s. This is why I was pointing out that when Sam kind of cautiously protects the center while pretending or acting as if he's supportive of this, he was primarily focused on strategy and not what is right and not what is true. And I'm fine with, you want to have a strategic discussion? Maybe strategically, Democrats should shut the fuck up about trans issues. Except that that's pretty much what they did, and it failed.
Yeah.
So shutting up isn't it, has to be something else. If you respond, it's like, please don't feed the bears. Please don't feed the trolls. If you respond to the trolls, you're giving what they're saying air. But if you don't respond to them, you're letting it linger. And I don't know that there's any good solution for that, especially when we are all being spoon-fed repeat information on every bit of social media based on an algorithm that gives you more of what you already think by default. That's why this episode is not sponsored by Ground News, because nobody sponsors any of this. But I will say I do subscribe to Ground News, and I found that incredibly useful over and over again. So,
yeah. I like that I don't have to get breaking news on fucking Twitter, which is one of the areas I'll agree with Sam, even though I'm suspicious that he is not on Twitter because he cites a lot of Twitter ass bullshit. Twitter is like the cancer of society, and I really think if you're on Twitter, it is bordering on like a moral obligation to get rid of it because it is so bad for you, but not quite there yet.
Hey.
Anyway, $10 from Melatonin Ale. Hey.
Yay!
My husband had his tonsils removed as a child and it changed his voice for life. Pretty sure tonsil surgery is more common than gender affirming care. Don't see anyone getting upset about consent for that. Yes, there is like countless examples of other medical procedures that irreparably change you as a person, that people have as children, that are not controversial, that are not talked about, and which is why I try to point out the bias of the anti-trans stuff in it.
Thanks so much, and good seeing you at the expo.
Yes.
$10 from HP Lovecats. Now I've got The Cure playing in my head, and we haven't even got started reading the message. I'll take American conservative views on European trans laws seriously when American conservatives want European gun laws in the U.S. That's actually pretty clever.
Yeah. Like they like it when it benefits them. $9.99 from Nazi D. Y'all have wanting to shout praise Jeebus, but I'm an ex-Jew. Oops. Seriously, y'all are awesome. Y'all are inspiring me to get into activism. People need to shut the fuck up and mind their own business. # go Jimmy yourself, Jimmy. Yes, absolutely. I mean, listen, activism is not for the faint of heart. It is going to burn you out really fast. So you have to have some thick skin, but we will never have enough voices. Never think that there are enough people doing it better than you. We need as many voices as possible, and you can get better. So I say get involved if you have the stomach to do it.
There are countless people I've worked with over the last 20 years who are stunned that I'm still doing this and I haven't burnt out. And I will say that there are several reasons why I haven't burned out. Number one, I'm pretty good about my downtime, alone time, and separating things out. But also, I've had incredible support, not just from Arden and Jimmy and my friends doing this, but all of you who are making, my Wednesday nights awesome. So thank you. $10 from One-Eyed Heathen. I think your treatment of Jacob was perfectly justified since he was clearly dishonest and his goal is just to make sure trans kids don't get health care. I don't think it was perfectly justified. I think it was somewhat justified. And I don't think his goal is as clear as you make it out to be.
Mm-hmm.
There's been a lot of really good conversation. And what it was is it's like arguing with a creationist. They'll throw this up, or the flat earthers. Here we go. The final experiment for flat earth is happening right now in Antarctica. So flat earthers would say, yeah, but what about this? And then you debunk it. And what about this? And you debunk it. And what about this? And you debunk it. And so they finally got to this thing where they're doing, we're going to do the final experiment. We're going to get some flat earthers. We're going to take them to Antarctica in December and show them that over a 24-hour period, the sun never sets, that the sun is visible for 24 hours straight. They were down there for 3 days. I don't know if they're headed back yet, but they were down there for like 3 days. And some of the flat earthers, after observing the sun going around for 24 hours, decided it was time to go back to the drawing board. No, I'm sorry. When you agree that this is the final experiment, it's the final experiment. But now what's going to need to happen is those people who are too stubborn, they're going to have to go to space. Space, the final experiment. These are the voyages of flat earth exercise. Anyway, it is constant goalpost moving. And what irritated me about Jacob is that I asked straightforward questions to expose a bias that has been hidden behind his calls, and not too well hidden. And then it was just, yeah, but.
Yeah.
I'm done with yeah, buts. There's a limit to how many times you can move the goalpost before we need to stop.
I did that exact same thing to him like a few months ago, and it was the same result, which is, I don't think his goal is to make sure kids don't get health care. I think he genuinely probably believes that he has a sincere interest in like disconcerting new treatment. But to me, it is about the same as a mom who has a sincere concern about vaccines. It's like, I think her concern is real and sincere, but she is completely misguided on the science. And the frustrating thing with Jacob is, like you said, when you lay out an analogy to demonstrate, and he didn't even know he walked so hard face first. It was like stepping on a rake when he was like, nope, I don't care about those other issues.
He left a Jacob-shaped hole.
Yeah.
He left a Jacob-shaped hole in the wall.
But just couldn't acknowledge that it logically, follows into the other things. Anyway, $10 from Monkey at Typewriter. I wonder if some of these misogynists and transphobes are just objecting to the existence of issues in space that doesn't involve them. Like, I don't want to go through that door till you said I can't. Oh, yeah, I mean...
contrarians, yeah.
I think that is definitely a big portion of like the internet discussion, but yeah.
$10 from Seven Toon Man, Part 1. Okay, let me get Part 2 ready. Do you think the fight for transgender rights will follow a similar prolonged path as the ongoing struggle for racial equality despite decades of activism and progress? Yes.
Yeah.
And Part 2, and thank you for 2 parts and 2 donations. What cultural, political, or societal factors do you think might either accelerate progress toward acceptance for transgender individuals or hinder their fight for equality? I have a quick thought, and that is, for some, on the issue of racial equality or marriage equality or gay rights, it really took a change of people around, the attitudes of people surrounding people, a change in their churches, but also it required, for some of them, to actually know someone. There needed to be a period of queer normalization. There needed to be a period of, hey, you don't get to kick this person out away from this water fountain or out of this diner or stuff like that. You needed allies to stand up Women didn't get the right to vote because of them. It was the people who could vote at the time, men, who had to be convinced to give them that right. It should never be that way, but it was. And this similar sort of thing happens. You need allies. You need people who recognize, you know what? This plan is actually the better world. And the people who are objecting to it are fearful bigots at best. And it's not even necessarily their fault. They were taught and raised and surrounded by other fearful bigots. It's going to take time and cultural changes, and it's going to take people who are not the affected class actively speaking and working to protect and embolden the protected class.
Yeah, I think it's worth noting that, like, before the Civil Rights Act, in the 70s, like, it was a slow haul, right? I mean, like, there was progress for sure, but until it was enshrined in the law that you could not discriminate against these people and prevent them from free and fair access to society. Granted, there are still, like, systems that were built before then that are still, resulting in unfair outcomes for, like, people of color. But, like, it really took enshrining in law that you cannot treat these people, like, unfairly for society to start to grow at a rate that was reasonable. So I think it's going to be something similar. But I also don't have future sight. And this was a super sticker from LA Silver Surfers. It was a pair flying with a cape. Thank you, LA Silver Surfers. That's you. Oh, I get it.
I'm refusing.
I get it. I followed.
$10 from Stephen G. Clenard. I dare you to read this super chat. Dare accepted. I thought about refusing, and you're just right. I needed to read that.
$10 from Monkey Up Typewriter. Maureen, if you're still here, you should know that about 80% of our live chat wants you to be their grandma. So you might have to set a few more places for Thanksgiving next year. I don't know how old Maureen is. So I don't know how I feel about calling her grandma, but I've stuck my foot in my mouth about assuming a caller's age before, and I'm never going to do that again. I love Maureen. She's really sweet.
Grandmas are moms, so it could be that we just all want her to be mom.
Fair enough.
And, it genuinely... For every yash that I have to deal with, for every you're gay homie, for every homophobic, transphobic jackass out there, there's a Maureen, there's one of the many others that it's like, oh, somebody listens and something resonated, and I'm going to get mad about something. Hearing from them and watching them actually care and learn stuff, even if they don't fully grasp it, to at least be able to go, you know what? I don't think I'm ever going to understand what it's really like to be non-binary, but that's okay, because I don't need to understand what it's like to be you. I don't need to understand. I just need to understand that you deserve the same respect and dignity as other people. And here's the name you prefer to be called. Here's how you like to be preferred or referred to. And out of respect for that, if you're, if you want me to call you peanut butter and use these are pronouns, I just do it.
Yeah.
And if I get it wrong, I apologize and try to correct it. I mean, Arden and I have a number of friends who are, and family, who are non-binary. And every single one of us has gotten a gender wrong in the heat of a discussion or something else at some point. And the reason I was so quick to correct Maureen is because we're quick to correct each other. When a family member misgenders somebody, we're just like, hey, quick, they, she, he, not laughing, he, but yeah.
Yep.
I'm glad that chat likes Maureen.
Me too. I think this one's you.
$20 from Cedar and Sound Studios. Not getting tea gen issues is like not getting drinking tea. You might have the conversation, but if not, you wouldn't vote to ban tea from stores and order people to only drink coffee because it's none of your business what's in my cup. That's basically what I just said. Only you said it cooler and in a super chat.
And that was
an
what
hour and a half before I said it.
That was what my end of the intro was supposed to be. You know, like I don't need Sam Harris to think I'm actually a woman or for Richard Dawkins to accept my definition of a woman. All I want is for him to stop advocating for things that make the lives of trans people harder unnecessarily. I think there is room for like more nuanced discussion, like I said, on certain elements of trans people and how we interact with society for sure. Really only with sports do I think there's nuance. But I guarantee you my nuance is not going to be the kind that Richard Dawkins likes or that Sam Harris likes. It's more of a, you can't just unilaterally ban people. That's almost never going to be the solution. Yeah, I just want people to leave us the fuck alone. Like I want to, you know, my life is so much better when I went to my friend's wedding, I didn't talk about being trans almost once. I mentioned it in my speech that I gave because I was the best woman, but like being trans didn't come up the entire weekend because when I'm there, it's not relevant. You know, when I'm hanging out with like my friends at the Reptile Expo, I know Rebecca watches sometimes now, so I don't know if she's watching this and knows, but like, I don't talk about these things with these people. Like it's not relevant to those discussions. And it's so irritating that it has to always come up everywhere else. Anyway, 20 euros from Tezzy May. Arden, you don't owe me or anybody in education, but I've learned so much from you and all the TACIS hosts. No amount of research would have been as helpful as hearing from real people. I hope you know how appreciated you are. That means a lot. It really does. Cause I do get burnt out quite a lot, but every now and then, like I'm kind of, since the election, I've been on like a bit of a roller coaster. I've had a few, like, I can never do this work ever again to like, actually I have more fuel in my tank than I've ever had kind of moments. I just want people to leave us alone. Like I want trans kids to be able to grow up and to like make it to adulthood and to not feel like they have to be an activist or like they have to be a trans YouTuber or a porn star to make a living, that they can do whatever it is that makes them feel fulfilled because all paths are open to them, just like they are open to all people. Yeah, I don't like that trans people feel like they're siloed into areas to make a living because it's the only place that people accept us. It's really frustrating.
Trump's going to ban trans people from the military. And I'd like to say in advance that if that actually happens, I'm not a lawyer, but I genuinely hope that every trans person who winds up kicked out of the military joins together in a class action lawsuit to sue the United States government for essentially breach of contract, just taking away their career. These are people who voluntarily joined the military and were basically promised certain things, and instead they're banned from serving openly, and then they can serve openly, and now they're going to be banned from serving openly or otherwise. And you cannot fuck people around and take away their careers. You cannot say, hey, we're going to give you this job, and you know, as long as you meet your requirements and do all this, you can do, 15 to 20 years, you can retire, you get your GI Bill, everything else, and then have their rights ripped away based on the whim of which old white dude is in charge.
Yep.
Oh, and somebody's going to say, hey, Matt, why does it matter if they're old or they're white? It doesn't, but they are every fucking time.
I also think it's worth noting that, to the people who are like, oh, maybe there's a good reason. The U.S. military is the single largest employer of trans people in the U.S. No organization employs more trans people than the U.S. military. And you're going to be putting, I think it's something like 15% of trans people unemployed. So just the notion that like you want trans people to stop talking, but you're going to make them all unemployed. Like what? That's going to cause so many more problems and so much more chaos around this issue. It's so like myopic. It's just irritating as fuck. But anyway, $10 from Deke Cummings. As a goth dad to two wonderful adults who are trans, thanks for all you do to represent and educate people about that community. I love you guys so much. Thanks.
Oh,
I
thanks,
always
dude.
get worried about representation because not all trans people agree with me, but I try to talk about positions that I feel like are not too aberrant from what the majority of activists who I talk to would agree with.
$10 from Alyssa Silver Bow. What do you call a night nobody expected? Surprise. What do you call a night encircled by enemies? Surrounded. I used to be surrounded. Which night made King Arthur's round table circumference? Come what?
Very nice.
Hashtag Matt's a white knight.
The whitest
I'm an
night.
old white knight.
$9.99 from Poor Claire. How could you design an experiment to test the accuracy of lie detector tests? Would you have to know which statements are lies, which may cause certain responses in the liar? Yeah, I think you could. Or sorry, go.
Yeah, you couldn't. We still don't have access to what's in other people's mind, but I know what's in my mind, and so you can give me a lie detector test, and I can try to fool it. I can try to, and you or answer honestly. I can try to hide things. There's ways, provided you trust the people involved, to show how reliable it is. And we know that that lie detectors can be fooled. And lie detectors, to the extent that they work at all, they partially work based on the sort of Dumbo's magic feather effect, which is the people who think they work are going to get nervous that you slapped them in a lie detector, and that's going to make it work better, because that's the sort of reaction it's trying to reach. For sociopaths and people who understand that lie detectors are bullshit, the test results are never going to be reliable.
Conversely, I would imagine for people with like social anxiety who may like wonder, am I lying about this? Do I really know the answer? Probably give false positives more frequently too. I can imagine with the kind of things that they measure that there's lots of situations where it invalidates the results basically.
Yeah.
$20 from Dade Murphy. Yeah, you laugh till your motherfucking ass gets drafted while you're in band camp, thinking the draft can't happen until you fuck around and get that anthrax napkin inside a package wrapped in saran wrap wrapping. I have no idea what I just read. I'm honestly proud I didn't trip over myself faster though. I thought for sure that was going to be messier, but
you laugh till your motherfucking ass gets drafted while you're in band camp, thinking that the draft can't happen until you fuck around and get an anthrax napkin inside a package wrapped in saran wrap wrapping. That's a rap. I don't know whose it is. But yeah, I've heard it, I think, or I've heard something like it.
Dade probably just made us say something absolutely ridiculous. Well, I did make us say something ridiculous, so maybe Dade just wrote a little silly rap real quick. Thanks, Dade.
Why does it sound like Eminem?
It does kind of feel like Eminem with the flow it has, doesn't it?
Yeah, that feels like an Eminem groove.
Somebody says, I did good, but Matt did amazing. Listen to you.
$10 from Moonstar. I love it when Matt white knights for his co-host, especially for Arden. I'm sure she's capable of saying, oh, yes, she doesn't need me to white knight or anything. But sometimes it's nice to have someone show their love by standing with you. Yes. And sometimes when you come after my co-host or my partner, it's not that I'm going to jump in because she needs me to. She'll fuck you up. Like I was
already going off on him when Matt jumped in.
I just didn't want to be left out.
Right. Yeah. The thing you told me to calm down, I was already like, oh, okay. So rather than like address the thing I said, you're going to tell me to calm down. Like,
who are you, Taylor Swift?
It's so funny because I feel like when I have debates with like friends and family, people I'm like personally invested in, debating really gets me flustered. I have a real hard time keeping my cool and thinking straight. But when I'm on these shows, I don't know. It's like the ridiculousness of some random person in India telling me to calm down. That just like makes me immune to the situation. I don't get flustered at all because I'm like, okay, that's so silly.
By the way,
yeah,
it is Eminem. It's from Square Dance.
Oh,
People, it feels so good to be back. Ladies and gentlemen, introducing the new and improved you-know-who.
All right,
Yeah,
I
that's
see.
from Square Dance. It's been a
and
while
somebody
since
said it in the chat too. Yeah, I see.
Awesome. Here we go. $10 from Poor Claire. This was you, wasn't it? I jumped on it. Oh, well.
I don't know. 99 from Poor Claire. Also, people may have different responses in experiments than situations where something is on the line in response to like White Knight / Savior. Isn't it better to be that than a piece of shit? But I'm open to arguments.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I think
sometimes.
I think if you're kind of like steamrolling someone by doing it and like not letting them get in and make their point, then maybe that's kind of where it becomes more of a problem. But like if you're just defending someone, I think you want that. So, yeah.
In this case, I have a limit to how long I can sit here without talking. And I let Arden do all the heavy lifting today on all the trans stuff. So it was like, and every time anything even started to get heated, she was the calm one. So for little smug prick to tell her to calm down, it's just fuck it.
It was like I elevated my pitch like 2 decibels and he was like, whoa, calm down. Okay, man.
It's not only better to be White Knight sometimes than a piece of shit. It's like when people want to say, oh, you're woke. Yeah. Sorry you think that's an insult. Sorry you think gay's an insult. Sorry you think whatever's an insult. You're tossing out words as if they're insults when they're not.
I also wonder if that caller, I believe India just passed some pro-trans legislation too. And so I kind of wonder if India is going to be entering. I already know they have a lot more cultural baggage and they have some kind of like gender diversity in their history. With like Hijra, I think is the word for that group. And so I'm just curious to see what we have a lot of callers from India. Like it's like once a week or so we'll get a caller out of India. So I'm curious to see how the trans panic backlash will play out there and on like the global stage. But yeah.
$10 from Susan Klein Hexelhorn. I'm a trans woman in my 70s. I just want to offer my meager financial support for all the good work you're both doing for our community. Thank you. Well, thank you, Susan.
Aw.
I mean, there are, it is always surprising to me that some of the people who,
Sorry, somebody pointed out the caller was from Sri Lanka, so I got that wrong, but I appreciate it, chat. Thank you. Sorry.
Well, our new forest dragon is both in Sri Lanka and India, so anyway, it's always great to hear from and see smiling faces from people who we know had it harder than the generations that came after, and that actually is what gives me hope. Is that no matter how bad things are about to get over the next few years because of a dramatic change in control over the government of the United States, and that's going to have repercussions around the world. But the trend has still been towards improving and making the world better. And hearing from people who had it worse, who still managed to maintain some positivity, I'm not going to give up. I've thought about giving up more times in the last couple of years than ever, but no.
I would like to. I'm tired, but it's not going to happen. Unfortunately, I have the same thing Matt has, which is like a neurotic compulsion to correct wrongs that I see. And so as much as I want to stop, as long as there is bigotry writ large, I will probably be here talking, unless I'm against the wall, but that's another story. $10 from Mr. Boricua 10. Glad to see live. Ryan and Maureen are awesome. Some others, Jacob and Yash, could use a bit of humility. As for the monologues, Dawkins and Harris can get fricked. Trans people rule. Like I feel more that way about Dawkins than Harris. I don't know if Harris is as far off the deep end as Dawkins, but he was like, I don't know, this podcast was it was genuinely shocking to me. I heard him on the Bulwark podcast saying some stuff that I was like, wow, that's the first thing you think of when it's like, what did the Dems do wrong? That's a little insane. But this podcast was genuinely shocking, the amount of like just untrue things he thinks about trans people, and this like self-victimizing belief of like, oh, it's a thought crime if I don't think they're a real woman. Like, first of all, what is this like bullshit thought crime thing you've come up with that is all about victimizing yourself, not real? And who is doing that to you? Like, I have said so many times on this show, almost every trans activist I know thinks the same. If you misgender me, I don't want to be your friend. I think you're an asshole, but I'm not going to police you. You can go be a bigot. It's the land of the free. Like, go think all the bigoted things you want. But it doesn't mean I have to like you or be your friend or tolerate you. It doesn't mean that I don't think that like workplaces shouldn't have the ability to like fire you if you're harassing one of their trans employees, intentionally misgendering them repeatedly. Like, I think those things are good. Companies should protect their workers and their employees. Like, you're allowed to go home at the end of the day and think that I'm a man, but you're not allowed to like make the workplace environment unsafe for me, especially if there's customers or something involved. But yes, I do love Ryan and Maureen. I really like the conversation with Ryan. I hope he calls back.
$10 from Infallible Fowl. Just keep living your best life. The rest of the world will catch up. Progress is inevitable, even if it feels like the country took a step back. We need people brave enough to keep speaking up. Thank you. No, thank you.
Thank you very much.
It's one of those things. I'm glad people appreciate it, and I'm glad that I have the opportunity to do it. I don't know how to not do it. And Arden can tell you all the stuff that she's like, oh, I'd rather be doing this and talking about this. That's the stuff. When we're done with the show, we're going to go down to the living room. We are probably going to
go see what we're going to watch, because I don't want anyone to spoil it. If there's always going to be some asshole in chat, but yes, sorry.
We're going to watch a show.
Yeah. And
we'll visit about stuff. We'll probably talk about the show for a couple minutes of, could you believe this and whatever else. But that's us kind of decompressing from it. And then while she's going to do the Transland call-in show tomorrow, I'm going to be working on other stuff. And when the weekend gets here, and for most of next week over the holiday, we're probably not going to be talking about a bunch of these issues. And yet it will always come up. And somehow or another, I'm going to get emails and comments, and I'll be jotting down notes for scripts and everything else. I don't know how to not do the stuff I do. And I wouldn't want to. But someday it'll be nice. Someday, I hope that Arden and I have a 5 to 10 acre property on a roadside with our home and with a reptile zoo / facility shop where people can come and pick up their feeders for the reptiles, pick up reptiles that we breed and produce, and then walk through the collection and look at a wide variety of snakes and lizards and learn about them. I'll be content to do that until I'm fucking dead. Now I'm going to have to find somebody younger to come do some of the cleaning work on the rats, in probably 20 years or so. And to never have to talk about secular morality, which I'm doing 2 or 3 different videos on this month again, because I've done it.
Because it'll never be enough until we don't have to. It'll never be enough. Yeah.
Never enough.
Never. Okay, $10 from Hyper before we get fucking DMCA'd. Flat earthers, anti-vaxxers, trans deniers, all you science deniers, fear tremble, for the trumpets of science blaze loud, the march of progress ever forward. We are Valkyries of the forest. Nice. That is really funny.
Oh, that's really good. $10 from Jake. Insert clever dapper inside joke here, Nelson. $10 super chats. Okay, as a left-handed person living in a right-handed world, I dig what you're saying, Arden. It's a matter of, do you choose to understand? I don't know that you get to choose that either, but yeah, I get what you mean.
I think there's a choice in how obstinate you're going to be. And I think a lot of people might choose to bury their head in the sand a little bit. But yes, I agree. I don't think you choose what you believe or what you understand. $10 from Brent J. Trans issues lost the election. Don't pee on my face and tell me it's raining. Punctuation is important. All kinks qualify.
Thanks, Brent.
That's really funny.
50 from Darius Mahai. I don't know which currency that is, but I don't care. For the Star Trek reference, I laughed at these are the voyages. Yes. It's so funny, and we knew this was going to happen with the flat earthers. Now, one of them is being both criticized and applauded because he posted like a TikTok of himself down there, and he's like, I was wrong. But if you keep listening, he doesn't say, I was wrong about whether the earth was flat. He was wrong about whether or not the sun is visible for 24 hours in an orbit around an area. And then he's basically one of those back to the drawing board people. I was wrong about the sun. We've got to come up with a new model. And it's a clear demonstration that he has a foregone conclusion and is trying to lead and massage the evidence to support it.
Yeah.
If you're an honest interlocutor and an honest investigator, you follow the evidence where it leads. And right now, all of the available evidence leads to a oblate spheroid Earth spinning on an axis with axial tilt, orbiting a sun, along with all of the other things that are round in the sky or around in here that we see.
That's what that flat earther, I saw that video. It was like kind of what Talking to Jacob was like, where it was like, you make a claim based on your view. Okay, if that's the information you're working with, then fair enough. I can't fault you for the information that you have access to. But when I then present you with information and you go, well, yeah, but what about the thing that I think, though? It's like, okay, you're not, I can't take you seriously. Because like, if you can't realize that you are just wrong, or at least, at the very least, be like, okay, maybe the earth is round, but maybe I just need to like go back to the Bible and like re-examine the things that I thought were indicating that it was the earth should be flat, whatever it takes, you know, like it should cause you some internal self-reflection and really changing like fundamentally the model that you're working with. And like with Jacob, having access to like, oh, well, France just a month ago published, you know, a review of the literature that came to the opposite conclusion of the UK. Like, and the US does, like, all our medical organizations side with what France said. Like, at the very least, that should make you go, okay, you know, I still have some questions, but, you know, at the very least, I guess it's clear that, like, the medicine seems to suggest that this is beneficial for trans people. I guess I just want to know, like, you know, it should modify your position to some extent. But when you just ignore it and go, but what about my thing, though? It's like, you're not, I don't know how to handle that. You're not, there's no intellectual and honesty there at all. $10 from Russell Larson. Your mom. Thanks, Russell.
Thank you, Russell.
My mom's the bomb. She sent us maple syrup.
And she sent me barbecue potato chips, although I don't have the heart to tell her that I don't think I can eat them yet, but I hope I'll be able to eat them before they go bad. $10 from Secular Felinist. I bought a wooden whistle, but it wouldn't whistle. So I bought a steel whistle, but it still wouldn't whistle. So I bought a lead whistle, but it still wouldn't let me whistle. Whistle while you pun.
Whistle while you pun. $10
and possibly the last super chat, unless somebody sends in another one to make me say something just absolutely terrible.
$10 from Cedar and Sound Studios. I've taken several polygraphs for work reasons. They do not detect lies, only your ability to feel dishonest, which is flawed, but they are really good at catching people who try using countermeasures. Interesting. Yeah, I mean,
so
it's just,
yeah. Go ahead.
I don't know. I can accept that there's probably some degree of utility to them, but like, it's also like, I don't know if you guys watched the videos where, you know, like the Botez sisters did one not that long ago where they had the things on and they were like playing chess and answering questions, and like a lot of the questions that you ask don't have a clear, like you need a clear yes or no answer for the polygraph to make an evaluation, right? Like a true or false proposition, and not all questions have those kind of things. But like, do you think the trans thing is bullshit? Like, that is a messy and nuanced enough question that, like, I don't know. Like, I think you could even give like a fuzzy answer to that and it would be like true, or it could say you're lying and it's like, well, because I think that this one part and not this, you know what I mean? Like, it's so much more nuanced than people give it credit for. But
if you go to the research, the person administrating the polygraph is more important than the polygraph machine. Asking the right questions and the right follow-up questions to distinguish between different responses, because you're measuring a bunch of different things there. Asking the right questions is how you get more accurate. But you really need a subject that is at least willing to buy into the notion that this machine may likely out them for whatever they did. So, or didn't do. All right.
yeah.
But I don't believe my own bullshit because I'm not bullshitting. $10 from Jamnik. Moses supposes his toes are roses, but Moses supposes erroneously. For Moses, he knows his toes aren't roses. Moses supposes his toes to be. I think I got all of that.
Sick. That was great.
There's still a little bit of lisp and other stuff because of my recent dental work. But
before you put your butt in,
on that note,
I want you to do your button uninterrupted. I just want to say that I appreciated the callers we had today. I saw lots of people in the chat who were talking about like sports and other things like that. I hope I'm going to be on the Transatlantic Call-In show tomorrow at 2 p.m. Central Time. If those, for the small percentage of you who've made it this far into the show, please do call in because I really want to talk to you and the biological essentialists. I've always been really open to these conversations, and I hope that you guys will show up with sincerity and not like Jacob did, where you're going to resist new information, or like Yash, who wants to just assert what's really in my head. That's not productive. But like, I do want to have a really honest intellectual conversation about these things because they matter and they affect people's lives. And I hope you handle them with the seriousness that they deserve.
I was actually going to say I'm going to let Arden put a button on this, but while you're getting ready to roll the credits, I will say that Yash doesn't care what's in your head, honey. He only cares what's in my head because you're a woman and he knows it and recognizes
what's
it.
in my pants,
and he's got a problem dealing with women. On that note, huge thank you to everybody for tuning in, for your contributions and everything else. Go to patreon.com/calltheline or linemerch.com. Don't miss Transatlantic Call-In show tomorrow. If you're not going to be around, if you're going to be celebrating the holidays with family, don't let the conflict ruin your time. Whether you celebrate Christmas or whatever else you may or may not celebrate, if you get to spend time with people you love, if it gets out of hand, remember, they're supposed to be people you love. And if they're not, spend time with better people like us. See you next time.
Fuck. Why did it not do the button? There we go.
See?